Hey friends, welcome to the channel. So here's another interesting story of Deku. What if Deku had a velocity quirk? I have given credits to original author in starting of the video, but if the original author wishes to reclaim copyright or remove this video, I kindly request before giving copyright strike. Please contact us using the information provided in the channel info. We respect and acknowledge authorship rights, and I will delete that specific video by myself. Thank you. Project Velocity by D3Mi Art. Inko was in the middle of preparing dinner when her phone rang. Inko put down the knife on the counter and took out her phone. It was her spouse. She knew that much without even looking at the caller ID. "Hey Hisashi, are you headed home from work?" Inko asked, knowing this was a typical ritual because her husband would frequently contact her on his way home from work. A peculiar behavior unique to Hisashi, since the spouses of all her friends seldom ever engaged in such activities. It was merely routine most of the time, but occasionally it served as a useful reminder of when supper was supposed to be ready. Hisashi spoke with enthusiasm in his voice. "I'm fine, honey, but I have good news. I got a call from the hospital a few minutes ago. Kana just came out of labor. Our nephew was just born." The news registered in Inko's thoughts and she froze. It took her several readings before it all made sense. When it happened, she let out a cry. "Wait. What do you mean? Kana already had her baby, but he wasn't due for another week, and how are you acting so calm?" Since this was the day the three of them had been anticipating since Kana first discovered she had a sister, Inko felt she should be happy for her. Was expecting a child, but to hear the news so abruptly was causing Inko's anxious thoughts to become uneasy. Hisashi comforted his wife, saying, Honey, everything is okay. I'll be home to pick you up in a few minutes, then we can head over together. I'm sure your sister will appreciate our company." Still, he was not succeeding. While Inko was conversing with him, she switched off the stove and hurried to the closest loo. She started to tidy up the mess she had made since getting up and grabbed a comb. While she was brushing her hair, she stated, "No, Hisashi. Everything is not okay. We were supposed to have a week left to prepare everything. Most of everything won't be ready until Friday. Hisashi, it's Monday." Hisashi cracked a smile. "Inko, Kana and the kid most likely won't be discharged until Thursday at the earliest. We still got some time to make sure everything is in order. I'm pulling into the neighborhood right now." Inko dropped the hairbrush as her terror level increased. She opened her beauty bag and started looking for lipstick once she thawed. When her sister and her nephew left the hospital, she wanted the delivery to go as smoothly as possible and to have everything ready. "Honey, what did I just hear fall to the ground, and what did you just unzip?" replied Hisashi. This was almost assuming, though he had been used to his wife's tendency to freak out over the littlest things. At this point, her panic attacks were starting to cause more problems than they were solving. Having read all the baby care literature so she could support her friends, Inko exclaimed, "You realize that we were supposed to have dinner with Mitsuki and her husband tonight. Katsuki has given them a whole night's rest yet and isn't supposed to for another 2 months. Hisashi corrected himself and continued, "I already told Masaru and he informed his wife. They're fine, they'll order some takeaway." Her voice took on a tone as if she was ready to tear herself apart like an apex predator, and Inko halted as she did. "Hisashi," she said, pausing as she did. "You mean to tell me that you informed the Bakugos of the situation before you informed me, your wife and sister to Kana?" she said. As if pleading for his life, Hisashi said, "I'm sorry," which, although he could not determine if it was effective, he was essentially doing. "I'm pulling up to the house right now." Inko seems to refocus after that. After running out of the bathroom, Inko sprayed some warm water on her face, forgetting to bring her lipstick. She dashed through the living room and down the hallway, pulling her purse off the couch with her peculiar hand. She stopped at the front entrance, got to her knees, and put on her shoes. After tying the laces, Inko tore open the door and hurriedly left. Inko ran along the walkway, barely remembering to close the door. Hisashi arrived from the house as she got to the road. Inko slid across the hood, flung open the passenger door, and entered. Then, without even saying, "Hello," or offering a greeting, Inko turned to face Hisashi and commanded him to drive. Hisashi stepped on the throttle and sped down the street, knowing it was best for him to follow his wife's instructions. Hisashi could see the anxiety spreading across his wife's face as they hustled to the hospital, being careful not to get pulled over. Hisashi spoke, but he could not see that she was listening. "Inko. Everything will work out fine." Up until Hisashi parked and switched the car off, she didn't appear to be aware of anything around her. Pushing open her door, Inko leapt out of the automobile as if the chair was going to shock her. Hisashi had to hurry to exit the vehicle. As he exited the vehicle, he noticed that Inko had already arrived at the lift and had already hit the button. Hisashi had to sprint to arrive in time as the lift door opened and the dinged a few moments later. He had to squeeze in just before the door closed, and he just made it. To gather his breath, he had to lean on the railing. He turned to Inko and said, "I don't want a word out of your mouth. I'm not the one that trained to be a hero. I feel like I'm about to have a heart attack." "I told you, you should start going to the gym more than once a month," Inko murmured, not looking at the floor indicator light. Despite having run more than her husband, she was scarcely tired. Hisashi stood beside Inko and shook his head. When they got to floor 6, the door opened and Inko started to go, but her husband stopped her, maintaining his arm wrapped around Inko's. Inko was led by Hisashi to the front desk. The receptionist looked up from her computer and said, "Hello, welcome to floor 6 of Shizukoa General. Who are you here to see?" "Kana Tsutsumi," Inko stated, expressing her want to visit her nephew and sister. The receptionist looked at her computer and stated, "I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name." Hisashi gave a small smile. Even though Kana is the sister of Inko, Hisashi was more knowledgeable than Inko on the political landscape of heroes. Hisashi was aware that Kana would not go by her true name because, in most cases, heroines who became pregnant tried their hardest to hide it. Kana had also made every effort to conceal her pregnancy. It helped that her baby bump was difficult to discern in the few pictures of her that the media was able to obtain, as they were always taken from a distance. It's not like she had one at all. Then try Kara Midoriya. We're her brother-in-law and sister, Hisashi remarked, mentioning the name he had assisted Kana in setting up in order to handle all of this. The front desk agent glanced at her computer and grinned. She got up then and motioned down the corridor, saying, "She's in room 628. Please be quiet, she hasn't had much time to recover." Hisashi nodded and drew Inko away from the desk, saying, "Thank you." Upon strolling along the corridor, Inko's attitude shifted. With an embrace, Inko said, "Hisashi, are we ready for the responsibility?" Hisashi paused, turned around, and said, "Nope, let's go home. I'm sure your sister will be fine." He started to move in the other direction, but before he could go very far, Inko took advantage of her peculiarity and took hold of him by the collar of his shirt. Hisashi paused and laughed as soon as he felt his shirt begin to draw him back. "We've done everything we can to prepare, but for things like this, sometimes your best isn't to be prepared for everything, but doing your best to adapt to the unknown," he said, turning to face Inko and putting an arm around her shoulder. With a hug, Inko sobbed a little onto Hisashi's shirt. Hisashi comforted Inko till her tears subsided. "Are you ready to go in?" her husband asked her as soon as she stopped. With Inko's nod, the two of them walked the final few feet to room 628, where Hisashi rapped on the door. Shortly after, someone exclaimed, "Who is it?" The voice sounded worn out yet restless. Calmly, Inko remarked, "It's Inko and Hisashi." The voice said, somewhat humorously, "Inko, it's good to hear your voice. You can come in. If you leave your baggage in the hallway." Opening the door with a phony laugh, Hisashi said, "Obviously you're not that tired if you're able to joke about that." When Hisashi and Inko entered, Kana was leaning against her bed. Her eyelids were half closed, and she was breathing slowly. She inclined her head and, despite her extreme paleness, smiled a little as she observed the two. Kana grinned and smirked. "Hisashi, I'm going to be able to joke about that on my deathbed." "It's lovely to see you again, Kana. How was everything?" Inko replied, walking over and giving her a quick hug. Come on you two, let's not go there right now. I was barely in labor for an hour. It seemed like the little sucker wanted to come out, Kana said, nodding towards a small tub with a blanket sticking over the edge. Seeing her sister's worried expression, Kana continued, Inko, he's fine. Despite being a week early, the doctor gave him a clean bill of health. Hisashi remarked, so what are you thinking about naming him? As he walked over to the tub and peered inside at the baby. The baby was sound asleep, swaddled snugly in its blanket. I thought I would leave that up to his parents, Kana replied. Inko, that's why you left training. You wanted to have a family, something you have been trying to have for 3 years now. That is the whole reason I carried him, Inko said, almost collapsing to the ground. Glancing up at her sister, Inko questioned, are you sure? I'm sure. It's not like my work will give me the time to be a proper mother. I want him to grow up with that in his life, Kana said, leaning forward to give her younger sister a hug. Hey, that doesn't mean I won't be there when I can. I'm the one that went through all this. I'm going to see him grow up. So what are you going to name him? Kana broke the embrace. As Inko walked over and saw her nephew for the first time, she remarked, Izuku. Midoriya. Inko turned to face Kana, who merely nodded. Kana and Izuku were released from the hospital after 3 days. Hisashi couldn't be reached, so Inko took them and drove them home. At Hisashi and Inko's house, Inko walked gently beside Kana while carrying Izuku. Inko helped Kana through the living area and to the ground floor guest room after unlocking the front door. Inko settled down on the bed next to her sister after deftly tucking Izuku into the bassinet that had arrived early. For some minutes, they sat on the bed together in quiet. Kana asked, taking a short sip of water, do you remember the day you told me you weren't going to train with me with the Hero Public Safety Commission anymore? Yeah, at first you seemed disappointed, but then you smiled and gave me a hug. You told me that I should follow my own path, no matter how different it was from yours. Inko replied as she gazed at her sister. Kana nodded, appearing to be about to say something but holding back. Rather, she opted to reply, you seemed so content. I never. Despite how frequently Hisashi and I butt head, I hope you two will always know how much I love seeing you together. I saw you grin as brilliantly as when you talked about Hisashi. With a cheeky smile, Inko said to Kana, I know you do. With a laugh, Kana gave her sister a small tap on the arm. In the upcoming months, Kana put in the effort to get herself back into pro-hero shape. When she came back, she announced to the world at a news conference that she was completely focused on a family matter. Kana tried to visit her sister and Izuku as much as she could as he grew. Her agency was only 2 cities away, so she didn't get to visit as much as she would have liked. Decreasing in frequency when she reverted to her former identity as Lady Nagant and the HPSC began assigning her more tasks. She nevertheless made every effort to see her kid, but one day that stopped. That tragic day when a single gunshot destroyed the life she had deluded herself with. And there is Project Velocity's first chapter. Thus, the past of Inko and Izuku has been altered. Kana Tsutsumi, a heroine I have adored since her introduction during the Vigilante cycle, and Inko are now sisters. I also thought she did a fantastic job portraying the darker tone of the show in Season 5 and the idea that a hero's world is not always sunshine and rainbows. I really like her modest but epic role in the anime. I won't go into too much more detail because the following part will disclose a little bit more about the character relationships. And this story will probably need to become a Wednesday update piece so as not to take up much time on Sunday. Next time. On that fateful long-forgotten day. After reading, let me know what you think. On that forgotten but unfortunate day, time for Project Velocity's second chapter. First, though, a brief announcement. Wednesday, Thursday will now be the day of update for this narrative. The purpose of the previous chapter was to depict Kana's relationship with Inko Tsutsumi and how her existence as Lady Nagant prevents her from being able to mother Izuku. I have no ownership rights to any of the characters in My Hero Academia. Let's finish off strong with that. At the time, Izuku was 4 years old. To kick off the weekend properly, his mother Inko was taking him to the neighborhood park. Inko's phone rang as they entered the park's general area. When Inko took out her phone, she noticed that Kana was calling. Inko took the call and put it to her ear, curious to hear what her sister could have to say. But before Kana could say anything, she cried, "Inko! Thank God you picked up." Inko heard the fear in Kana's voice right away and questioned, "What's wrong, Kana? Why are you calling?" Inko had to take a few deep breaths as she felt herself starting to worry about her sister fretting. Kana, who was breathing heavily, murmured, "Inko, I need you to listen to me. What I'm about to say is going to be confusing, but I need you to listen to me." Inko was somewhat concerned about that because she hadn't heard Kana gasp for air. Not following HPSC training. Kana was agitated, not exhausted, which is why she was having trouble breathing. "All right. What do you need to tell me?" was Inko's way of applying the stress management skills she had learned with Kana. As the wind whipped by, making it difficult for Inko to hear her sister, Kana remarked in a worried voice, "You're going to see my hero name in the news in the coming days. It will probably be about a fight I had between some other pro heroes. Just know that whatever they say isn't the truth." As Inko heard pebbles being moved from Kana's end of the phone, he said, "Then what is the truth?" That let Inko know who and why her sister was being pursued. Izuku tugged at Inko's pant leg and said, "Is that Aunt Kana?" Inko remarked, "It's Honey. We're having a serious conversation right now, and she needs to tell me something." Kana then let out a melancholy sigh and asked, "What is the truth, Kana?" "I'm sorry, but it's better if you don't know the whole story. Just now I'm going somewhere and I'm gone for a while," Kana replied. When it became clear that Kana would be detained, Inko's intellect cracked the code. "My God, Kana, what did you do?" Inko said, glancing around as though she and Izuku were under attack. She surveyed the gathering, spotting a new couple strolling the dog through the park. A street merchant making sales. Cones of snow. Simply individuals going about their everyday business, none displayed malevolent intent. "I apologize for not being able to tell you that, but there is something you can guarantee. Remember how we discussed what will happen in the future when Izuku begins to ask particular types of questions?" "Dialogue?" Kana questioned, catching her breath. Taking hold of Izuku's hand, Inko said, "I do," before guiding him to a park bench. Her gaze is still sweeping across the throng surrounding her. A couple of. Even though more people had appeared, none of them appeared to be intending to hurt Inko or Izuku. Kana remarked, her voice still tense but beginning to relax a little, "You remember how we would bring up our situation and explain the truth to him. About everything. Whatever was upsetting Kana, she would always feel better after talking to her sister." With a downward glance at Izuku, Inko replied, "I do. I need you to promise that doesn't happen. Whenever Izuku starts asking those questions, tell him whatever lies will convince him the most. Anything but the truth. It would be best if he knows. It will save him from a world of pain and hurt. A legacy he doesn't need to be a part of. Can you promise me that?" replied Kana. "Why?" Inko inquired, drawing in a short breath. "Why are you asking me to do all that? I know right now that this all sounds confusing, but when you hear the lies of the media you'll start to understand. For now, all I can tell you is it would be for the best if you and your family didn't have any connection to the name of Kana Tsutsumi or Lady Nagant. As my younger sister, can you do that?" Kana spoke as if she were sharpening metal. "Just tell me why. Why do I have to promise this? And I'll agree," Inko replied. However, Kana took a while to respond. While waiting for her older sister to respond, Inko felt her heart rate shoot through the roof. It was evident to Inko that her sister was hunting as she surveyed the throng. Perhaps she was, too. Only people who knew Kana and Inko as children were aware of their bond. The general public was unaware of it. Since Inko never actually intended to be a hero, she married Hisashi and took on his last name right away. She simply wasn't intended for the limelight, but the two sisters were too in love with one another to part from one another. At last, Kana responded to Inko's inquiry. "I apologize for not being around much, sis, but we trusted the wrong people, is all that has to be said." As soon as Inko heard her sister say those words and heard the phone disconnect, her entire world fell apart. Someone from their history was hunting her sister. Someone they had once trusted, and there's a good probability they would start chasing Inko and her family if they were after Kana. Kana's son Izuku caught Inko's attention. She was tasked with keeping the youngster safe from the outside world. She refused to allow him to become a target as well. For the next year, Inko adhered to her word and didn't bring up her sister or her heroic reputation. Upon viewing the latest broadcast and realizing that Lady Nagant had been taken into custody for the murder of two heroic figures, Inko comprehended Kana's motivation for not wanting Izuku to know the truth. If people had known that her sister was Lady Nagant's sister or that Izuku was her biological son, their perception of her sister would have changed from that of a terrorist and an S-grade criminal. That was the last thing Inko wanted to see on Izuku's mind because it would cause him to doubt his identity. It was simple to cut off Inko's relationship with her sister because to Hisashi's contacts. Everything was simplified by the fact that Izuku was born under the Midoriya name and she had Hisashi's last name. However, it was never going to be that simple. Izuku was a bright youngster who would start to ask questions when he noticed how different his quirk was from Inko's and Hisashi's quirk. Izuku asked where Aunt Kana was and why she wasn't visiting, and at first it was simple to respond. Izuku's interest was piqued with a simple lie. That she was too busy to visit. But Inko knew it would not last long. She put in a lot of work every day to prepare herself psychologically for the day she would have to confess the biggest lie of her life. When that day finally arrived, Inko realized she wasn't prepared. Like every other day, it had begun with Inko waking Izuku up for kindergarten. Izuku was waking up slowly, sweeping his purple hair away from his face. It took him a few minutes to wake up sufficiently to get out of bed and put on some clothes. As he moved down the corridor, Izuku started to scratch his right arm. She questioned, "Is there something wrong with your arm, Izuku?" as soon as Inko observed. Izuku kept rubbing at his arm, saying, "It feels sore and itchy." When Inko wanted Izuku to accomplish something without protesting, she would say, "Oh, you just probably slept on it weird. It can happen to anyone. Let's focus on breakfast and getting you to school." Izuku ignored the tingling sensation in his arm and concentrated on his and his mother's regimen to get him ready for school. Following a brief breakfast and teeth cleaning, Inko took Izuku to kindergarten in his car. As they approached the front door, Inko saw that Izuku was still picking at his arm. With her kid at eye level, Inko knelt down and said, "Is your arm still sore, honey?" Izuku put on a nice, tough guy face and answered, "Yeah, but it's not as bad as it was before." Inko laughed at this and gave Izuku a hug. "Well, try not to dwell on it too much. If, after some time, it still feels strange. We're going to the doctor to see what's wrong with it, school," Inko remarked. Izuku gave a nod before entering the school. Izuku tried his best throughout the day to ignore how uncomfortable and sore his arm felt. But as the day went on, the sensation simply grew stronger. Up until everyone went outdoors to play in the garden after lunch. Izuku could no longer bear the sensation in his arm at that point. He moved aside and attacked his arm once he was outside. Even after his arm turned crimson, the emotion persisted. He kept scratching his arm while observing the other children kicking a ball about. They were having fun until Katsuki Bakugo, Izuku's best buddy, grabbed hold of the ball and unintentionally kicked it a bit too hard. It sprang from the playhouse and whizzed past a neighboring tree. Each child approached the tree and alternated ly leapt to try to knock the ball out of it. As one child tried and failed to get the ball back, another said, "Maybe we should get one of the teachers to help." Not one of them was approaching. Bakugo, the only one who was even approaching the branch that the ball was resting in, stated confidently, "Nah, we don't need their help." Even so, he remained a good few centimeters distant. Another child said, "But none of us can jump high enough to get it." Izuku thought he could help, so he pushed off of the building and started to move over. Izuku was the most athletic pupil, despite being one of the shorter ones, and Bakugo saw this and grinned. "Why don't we let Izuku give it a try? He's sure to get it down and then we won't have to ask the adults for help." Izuku raised his gaze to the tree. Even though he was a skilled jumper, he didn't think he could jump so high. I don't know, Kachan. I agree with the others, it would be better to get one of the teachers. Besides, why don't you use your quirk to knock it down? Izuku replied as he looked at his closest companion. Bakugo laughed and replied, yeah, then I'll get in trouble for using my quirks. I guess you're just afraid that you can't jump that high. Sincerely, Izuku didn't care that he knew Bakugo was only playing a practical joke on him. To Izuku, it was Bakugo's way of expressing his sincere belief that Izuku could succeed. I guess it won't hurt to try. But if I can't get it, then we should ask one of the teachers to get it for us, Izuku remarked after estimating the height he would need to jump again. While Bakugo simply clicked his tongue at how effortlessly Izuku could get others to agree with him, all the children nodded in agreement. Izuku signaled to everyone to give him a clear way as he retreated a little to get an advantage. Izuku took off once everyone had made a large step away from the tree. He pulled his arms back as he approached the tree, then swung them up to propel himself skyward. Reaching up through the air, he aimed his hands towards the ball. It appeared as though he would be able to catch the ball as he approached the peak of his leap. He was still a few millimeters too short, though, as it turned out. He attempted to push his arm off the tree as he started to fall in an attempt to free the ball. His right arm suddenly erupted in pain, and vapor began to surround it. Izuku felt the lengthening and bugling of his right forearm, its size growing, and the narrowing of his hand. He suddenly reached out and knocked the ball from the tree. Izuku and the ball sank to the ground together. Izuku dropped to his knees, clutching his right arm tightly to his chest as he hit the ground. His arm exploded with pain that would eventually subside and then return. The pain steadily lessened as he pressed his altered arm to his chest. At that point, the school principal saw all the children gathered around the tree. She inquired, "Is everything all right?" as she approached. The children gazed at Izuku, observing the transformation of his dark purple hair. Izuku's hair had patches and stripes of green instead of being a single color. After giving Principal Nozomi a quick glance, Bakugo remarked, "I think Izuku just got his quirk." Principal Aneko Nozomi knew both Inko and Kana since she was an old friend of Inko's from the middle. At the wedding of Hisahi and Inko, they had both served as bridesmaids. She was therefore among the select few to whom Inko disclosed Izuku's predicament. Principal Nozomi instinctively crouched down in front of Izuku, knowing that it had to remain a secret, and said, "Midoriya, I need to see your arm." Izuku gave her a slow nod and held out his hand. Even though Inko and Kana had always assumed Izuku would inherit Kana's quirk, there remained a remote possibility that Izuku would have instead received the quirk of his father. Had he done so, his life would have been infinitely easier. However, Principal Nozomi realized that only she could see Izuku's right arm. She said, "Izuku, can you transform it back?" Izuku shook his head, unable to comprehend the sensation in his arm. "Manage it." Principal Nozomi saw she had to move quickly, so she quickly removed her suit jacket and covered Izuku. Looking to Bakugo, she said, "I need to take Midoriya to my office, so could you please let Mr. Bashira know that he will need to come out?" Izuku was lifted to his feet by Principal Nozomi while Bakugo nodded and departed. She led him into the building and out onto the garden. Principal Nozomi hurried through the schoolhouse to her office, where she and Izuku were inside. When she locked the door, she gave instructions. She went to her desk, picked up Inko's phone, and motioned for Izuku to take a seat in one of the chairs. "Hello Inko. I hope you're having a wonderful day." "That's excellent to hear. I'm calling because Izuku's quirk appeared. Sadly, it's Kana. Almost a perfect match." "It's okay for now. We're in my office right now. However, there is an issue. He doesn't know how to transform it back. I think it would be best if you got here as soon as possible. I won't be able to hold him in my office for the entire day without some questions being asked. Even the other kids hadn't seen his arm. You came to me because you trusted me." After a brief period of silence, Principal Nozomi replied, "All right, I'll let the front desk know. See you in a few." After hanging up, she made her way over to Izuku. She replied, "Your mom is going to be here in a few minutes." "Okay. How are you feeling? As she knelt down and met Izuku's gaze. For some reason, Izuku grinned immediately, then stretched out his left hand and said, I know how my arm was so itchy. When he opened it, a tiny glass marble appeared within his palm, saying, this got inside. Principal Nozomi gave the marble a very perplexed glance. A query that remains unanswered until Inko shows up. Fortunately, it happened soon enough. There was a knock on the door, signaling her presence. Walking over, Principal Nozomi answered the door. After shoving Inko inside, she shut and locked the door. Principal Nozomi gave a brief explanation of Izuku's attempt to remove a ball from a tree. Knowing this, Inko knelt before her son and grinned, asking, Izuku, I'm going to need to take a look at your arm. Can you show it to me? Izuku nodded slowly, reaching out from inside the jacket with his right arm. When Inko noticed Izuku's arm, she was taken aback and turned to face her companion. Although Principal Nozomi had stated that the match was nearly flawless, Izuku's arm did not resemble Kaina's. Kaina's lower arm was twisted against her shoulder while her weapon protruded from her elbow. A peculiarity about her sister Inko. Honestly, I thought it was disgusting. However, Izuku's entire forearm had changed into the rifle in place of that. His entire hand had extended and constricted into the barrel, while his forearm had become the stock and main body of a long-range rifle. It appeared to be a more refined form of Kaina's quirk, indicating that it had become stronger over time. But there was no time to see how Izuku's oddity held up. Looking over at her old buddy, Inko said, would be fine if I took Izuku home for the rest of the day. Principal Nozomi nodded and said, it's standard practice for a kid to go home early when their quirk first comes in. And between you and me, if you need the rest of the week, take it. After nodding, Inko turned back to face her son. For now, he had to turn his arm back. She could teach him about his peculiarity later. After training with Kaina at the HPSC, Inko and her sister discovered a lot about the peculiarities of one another. Kaina has emphasized how difficult it was to prevent her quirk from manifesting during stressful times. Izuku must have been under a great deal of stress for this to occur. Izuku, I want you to close your eyes and breathe slowly as you listen to my voice, Inko murmured, lightly pressing her index finger against Izuku's chest. This was the only way that she and Kaina could make each other feel better. It begins in the heart, the center of a person's soul. It flows through the lungs and swells with power, Izuku said, nodding and closing his eyes. Then it flows through veins and moves the body, Inko continued, tracing her finger down to Izuku's midsection. It goes from a person's feet to the end of the hand. Inko slowly moved her finger to Izuku's shoulder and down his arm. Steam started to form around Izuku's lower arm as Inko's fingers steadily got closer to his elbow. His arm gradually changed back. Inko's finger moved down into a regular arm, finishing by removing Izuku's middle finger. Izuku inhaled deeply and felt his whole body unwind. Putting Izuku in a tight hug, Inko replied, everything is going to be okay, sweetie. They spend many minutes giving one another more hugs. When they were finished, Inko thanked her buddy and returned her jacket. Izuku was escorted by Inko to the vehicle, where they drove home together. When they got home, Inko gave Izuku a little rice snack before they sat down at the kitchen table. Izuku asked his mother, is there something wrong with my quirk? Why weren't others allowed to see it? As he slowly consumed his rice. For her luck, Inko wanted to kick herself. Izuku would naturally pose the question that posed the most probing query. It didn't take long for Inko to come up with an idea when she noticed Izuku's All Might shirt. She started to think of a falsehood that would be believable and simple to recall. Izuku, you know how the world is protected by All Might. Inko said and Izuku nodded. Well, it wasn't always like that. Bad people were hidden in the world's shadows and they craved power. Imagine if someone bad got a hold of All Might when he was young and taught him to hate the world. With a shake of his head, Izuku responded, no, I want to. It's okay, the world isn't like that, but I worry about you a lot. Your father and I have always known you would have a powerful quirk, but you're gonna have to learn how to handle it, Inko cried as she embraced Izuku. Regulate it and employ it to safeguard others. It's preferable, though, if no one knew about your peculiarity until then. Could you please do it for me? I know that probably wasn't the best way to explain everything, but I can't take back anything I said. This was the lie I was going to have to live with for the rest of my life, Inko asked, holding back a grimace. Izuku considered it for a moment. The world was full of strong oddities, heroes who utilized them to defend others. How different would the world be if one of those heroes had grown up to be a villain? If he possessed a strong and remarkable quirk, he had to decide to follow the path of a hero. However, he had one goal in mind. Can I present it to Kachan at least? Of all the things Izuku was going to say, asking to share his quirk with his best friends should have been the last thing Inko expected to hear. She laughed a little and stroked Izuku's hair before saying, "How about you learn how to control your quirk before you show it Katsuki, okay?" Izuku understood his mother's comments and nodded, spending the remainder of the day playing in his room while Inko worked things out. Taking Aneko up on her offer to take the rest of the week off was the first step towards figuring out how to test her son on how to use his quirk without coming out as overly knowledgeable. The following day, Inko started teaching Izuku how to manage his quirk. First, he explained to him what his quirk was, explaining that it enabled him to change his right arm into a long-range rifle that could fire a bullet. Next, Inko worked with Izuku to teach him how to manage his quirk's transformation, making it only active when he wanted it to. By the time lunch was served, Izuku had mastered this skill abnormally quickly. When dinner time arrived, Inko was about to lay everything out for her son, but before he could say anything, he brushed some hair from his face and remarked on how his hair somehow weaved in on itself. Throughout the afternoon, Inko had been quietly providing hints that Izuku was supposed to use his dual-colored hair to weave bullets to use. Izuku needed to twist his hair around his finger a few times before he could figure out how to weave it into a bullet. Once he did, he slipped the bullet through the tiny opening. Izuku felt the bullet slide into the opening on the side of his forearm, and he leapt out of his chair with excitement, pointing his arm at the wall. Izuku flexed his arm without much notice, and a gunshot echoed through the house. "Izuku!" Inko screamed as she reached out and grabbed the speeding bullet with her quirk. The bullet glowed green as it slowed down, then stopped in midair. The next moment it flew straight into Inko's outstretched hand. As the bullet landed in her hand, Inko had to catch her breath. That was a use of her quirk she hadn't used in a long time. She flashed a stern look at Izuku, then in a calm voice said, "All right, rule number 1. No firing your quirk inside." Izuku responded, putting his arm back into its regular shape, "Sorry, Mum." With a sigh, Inko approached Izuku and gave her an embrace, saying, "It's okay, honey. When I initially became aware of my peculiarity, I wanted to explore my options. By mistake, I caught a hot piece of metal in my hand. Just be cautious about how we apply our peculiarities." Izuku nodded as he gave his mother a hug in return. Izuku and Inko rested that evening, working on Izuku's quirk, and after dusk together, Izuku went to bed, while Inko searched her closet for a vanilla folder and eventually found one with the Project Velocity stamp on the front. After returning to the kitchen table, Inko took a seat and opened the vanilla folder, which contained summaries of the many training sessions she and Kana had completed as teenagers, as well as a picture of them wearing their new hero suits to see if they fit. Summoner was written over Inko's photo and Lady Nagant over Kana's, but Inko wasn't searching for that. Moving on. She knew she could teach Izuku how to utilize his quirk, but that was about it. She was going to need some extra aid with the skills for Izuku to use his quirk efficiently. At the back of the folder, Inko found a business card of her and Kana's former HPSC handler. And speaking of Chapter 2, I intended to extend the conversation between the sisters, but it didn't feel right for what I had planned for the future, so I added Izuku's quirk coming in for the main portion of the chapter. The chapter is titled Long Forgotten but Fateful Day, but you could also add Learning the Basics. The next chapter will reveal to us who Izuku contacts for additional assistance and whether they are prepared to help. Will they view Izuku as just another Lady Nagant or as a chance to atone for previous transgressions? Recap and let me know what you think. Next time. It depends on how you look. Depending on your appearance, Chapter 3 brings us a little more information about Project Velocity and introduces us to the man who started it all, the reason Kana and Inko were trained to be professional heroes. We learn about his activities over the past year and the sacrifices he made to keep Project Velocity afloat. Does he view Izuku as just another Lady Nagant, or does he see Izuku as a chance to reinvent himself? As always, I have no ownership rights to any of My Hero Academia's characters. Let's end on a high note now. Fumiko Murio's career could be viewed as either a total success or a complete failure, depending on your point of view. When he originally joined the Hero Public Safety Public Commission right out of high school, he was looking for a job to help pay for college. It was a low-end job, a simple 9-to-5 that allowed Murio to live a bit in luxury, but he didn't feel like he was making a difference, which was part of the reason he wanted to continue his education. Initially, he kept his head down and completed his assigned tasks, but as he progressed through college and worked increasingly for the commission, he began to notice a disparity between the skills of average pro heroes and the abilities required to take down any villain who actually posed a threat to. Seeing this issue and hoping to outpace Murio, he started developing a program whose aim was to identify early gifted children with strong eccentricities and hasten their training to become professional heroes so that by the time they attended high school, they were on the first-year professional heroes. Later on in their careers, these heroes would be equipped to deal with any circumstance they encountered. The process of putting Project Velocity on paper and getting it in front of the HPSC president, however, was a different story. Murio had little hope of getting the program approved when he first started it because he was still a 9-to-5 employee and had little influence over anything. However, as he went through college and earned his master's in criminal behavior, he used his knowledge and charisma to help his coworker. With all of his promotions and his position keeping him and his wife in Mustafa, Murio started to lose hope in his program. Consequently, in a last-ditch effort, Murio chose to try and send a 1,000-page memo to the HPSC president. However, he didn't anticipate a response, so he shelved Project Velocity for years, storing the only other digital copy on a flash drive on his keychain. After being flown into Tokyo and given 30 minutes to give a presentation about Project Velocity, Murio was taken aback when the HPSC president started tapping his pen against his desk during that most stressful part of HS presentation. And that's where Project Velocity remained until he received words. Murio was about to say something when the HPSC president got up and left his desk, pausing to gaze out the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city and asking, "Tell Murio, how long have you been working for the commission?" The HPSC president said this while rolling away his pen. "Mr. Murio inquired. It's a straightforward inquiry. You were able to condense your program into a 1,000-page memo. Although you could have written it longer, you knew that fewer people would read the message the longer it was. Thus, I believe you ought to be able to respond to my query. For what duration have you been employed by the commission?" The HPSC president inquired once again. "Since high school graduation, sir. It will soon be my 11th year." "Mark," Murio uttered, his gaze darting down the unsigned document that the president of the HPSC had forgotten. The HPSC added, "Even early on you noticed discrepancies on what makes someone a pro-hero." He leaned on the glass to look over Tokyo, which is both the most absurd and one of the most assaulted cities in Japan. "Mr. Murio inquired. In the nearly 40 years that I've been in this role, I've never encountered someone who saw the same issue that I do. It is mentioned in your memo that most professional heroes need some time to neutralize a threat, such as a hostage crisis or burglary." Murio remarked, shifting his weight uneasily, "Yes sir, it took a bit of factoring since every situation is unique in itself." "Do you still adhere to the viewpoint expressed in your Project Velocity essay?" The HPSC president inquired abruptly, taking Murio by surprise. Murio started tapping his right hand against his leg and added, "I might have been a little strong in my wording, but yes." Had the HPSC president confined him because he believed he was an anti-hero? "You mentioned the average cost of property damage, victim compensation, and taxpayer funds used to correct a situation following a pro-hero's error on page 379. Your computation was a little off, but you used incomplete information, but you were correct with the information you had," the HPSC president stated, forcing Murillo to retract his statement. "As you can see, you were utilizing the tuition from more public hero high schools. However, the annual tuition for private high schools like UA or Shiketsu can reach 10 million yen. Please remind me of the average annual property damage paid by the majority of professional heroes." It was 2.5 million yen at the high end, sir," Murillo replied. The HPSC president turned to face Murillo and tapped his knuckles against the window again before saying, "I'll be frank with you, Murillo. This meant that in just 4 years, a pro hero could have caused enough property damage that the expense would have covered sending them to UA, for starters. Over time, the caliber of heroes has declined. Initially, these were people defending their rights as peculiar people and defending their family and country. These days, most people become heroes in the name of fame and money, and it shows. The commission is having to pay an increasing amount each year for property damage. And in 7 out of 10 cases, professional heroes are the ones who inflict property damage. In the other 3, it's because the villain was able to flee. Just yesterday, one of those quick-witted bad guys got away with running around because the heroes couldn't handle the situation. They didn't have the skill. You see the new generation of pro heroes, they don't think they want to be better, faster, stronger, more popular. They only care about their next paycheck, so when they're faced with a challenge that's beyond their level, they think they can still win, but then they make mistakes. And who has to pay for it? It's not the hero school, which failed to train and prepare new hero students for the jobs. Rather, it's the commission, which was established to supervise pro heroes. We must pay for their failure, for their lack of readiness. The pro heroes have only been painted in a positive light because they stopped the villain. It's not my position or my job to oversee that aspect of the heroes, so unless I'm forced to play my hand and demand new training for new heroes, also they're better prepared, I'm ordered to back off." With the HPSC president staring at him so intently that his very soul was beginning to tremble, Murillo murmured, "Sir, I'm tired of being handed flawed heroes and having to pay for everyone's mistakes," the HPSC president sighed. "I'm done with political and democratic processes. I'm ready to have the issue fixed and willing to work towards resolving it. To accomplish this using dishonest means, therefore we're going to target the younger generations where they're weakest." Murillo remarked, "I'm not following, sir, Murillo. I want you to train the best damn hero this world has ever seen. They'll be the most skilled, and when they become more popular, others will have to be better. Competition, new pro heroes all want to be the most popular, because it makes their paycheck bigger. And when quality drops at the top it does so at bottom even more. They'll come to understand that in order to defeat any evil who chooses to cause problems, they must train to be the greatest. Not the most showy or charming, but the strongest and most talented." To be certain of what he was hearing, Murillo added, "Sir, Project Velocity is greenlit." "Yes, I did sign off before to your arrival. However, keep in mind that Murillo, UA, and other institutions are unable to learn of your program without fear of reprisal. We'll be doing our jobs so much better than that they'll say we're undermining the system. This plan of ours will take time, but I'll be watching everything. Our careers may be on the line, so I expect a result by the end of the year. Project Velocity won't be off the books, but it will be so deep underground that no one you don't tell will ever learn about it. Am I understood?" Murillo said, "Yes, sir." He was overjoyed to be able to train a pro hero, someone who would embody the ideal of a hero for the world. After the meeting, he was granted access to an old commission building that was primarily used for storage. Although he would have preferred state-of-the-art faculty, since the program was under wraps, he was happy to accept any assistance. Murillo spent the weekend inspecting the building and saw that it had potential, so he called in some favors and worked late at. After that was all finished, Murillo had to find furniture for the space. The training machine and converting a floor into a martial arts studio were the first and most obvious additions. The filing and administrative work took up one floor, and then the building was divided into areas for more specialized training, like training rooms for particular types of quirks or different environments that pro heroes would encounter. And while the HPSC president remained largely a silent observer, he failed to impress a few employees that Mario was more than happy to accept as a sign of good faith. Next came the trainers. Those ranks primarily made up of older HPSC employees who had either been heroes themselves or had trained in some form of martial arts their entire lives. Mario was also able to hire some of his co-workers who had climbed the job ladder as well as hire some fresh minds to the commission. Finding a kid with potential was the last piece to be put in place. This kid needed to have a strong quirk, a baseline set of skills to work on, but most importantly, a deep-seated desire to become a pro hero. Mario wasn't going to find a kid, but he did find two sisters who could develop into a pro hero team. When their files appeared on Mario's desk, he initially believed that he had been given them by mistake. However, he looked through them out of curiosity and became intrigued by the older sister, who had the potential to become one of the world's most lethal sharpshooters, capable of taking out a villain from a distance. On the other hand, the younger sister's quirk limited her ability to attract small objects, which could be useful to a rescue hero if the object were heavier. Mario thought about the files for a week before meeting with the older sister. To put it mildly, the older sister was thrilled and wanted to shield the younger man, but when Mario clarifies that her younger sister would not be allowed, the older sister threatens to close the door. Mario didn't think he should at the moment, but since Project Velocity needed to start producing results quickly, he gave the younger sister permission to participate in the training. Mario quickly became appreciative of his decision to accept the deal. After only a few months of training, the sister's progress exceeded his expectations. Although he wasn't entirely sure why, his wife happily gave him the scientific explanation. They were sisters, which made sense in and of itself. However, what wasn't so clear was what that meant. Mario's wife clarified that they were close to each other in every way and that their goal was for each to reach their full potential. And the sisters' constant pushing improved them every day until, by the time the elder sister had only been a professional hero for 3 years and the younger sister was a senior in high school, they were on the rise level of many great professional heroes. One became the nation's best long-range fighter, while the other became the best close-quarters fighter. Between them, there was no opponent or challenger they couldn't defeat. However, nothing is permanent. The younger sister happily trained with her older sister, but Mario noticed that she lacked the same drive to become a pro hero as her older sister. So, after graduating from high school, the younger sister fell in love, and soon they were announcing that they were getting married and that she would be leaving the life of a hero. Mario acknowledged that the wedding was beautiful, and he was happy for the younger sister, but the HPSC wasn't too happy about losing a valuable asset. Fortunately for Mario, the older sister picked up her game and became a well-known hero, one whose success in the media and on billboards proved Project Velocity a success. After that, the elder simply had to go and murder the HPSC chief in order to wreck everything. Mario got the call informing her that Lady Nagant had killed the HPSC president. He knew he had to defend his program at all costs. He spent the next week working non-stop to prepare for anything that might be thrown at him. When the time came, he stood before the HPSC board, and questions were raised about the value of Project Velocity and whether the success that was achieved was worth the consequences. It took Mario 7 arduous months to keep Project Velocity alive and under his control, but in the end, he was able to do it by giving up command to a deal was struck that Mario would remain on the program as an acting supervisor if and only if he could find a suitable replacement for Lady Nagant by the end of the year. Fortunately, fate was on Mario's side, and only 6 months later he was about to find a kid that was about to save over 50 lives. The council that was formed to oversee the program was one of the groups that wanted to see Mario barred from the commission. With his career on the line, Mario started training the child right away, taking special care of his quirk. Everything about the child's development was recorded, and when the evaluations came in, the child was on track to become the ideal replacement for Lady Nagant. Takami entered the program with even less skill, but he was making more than enough progress to keep Project Velocity afloat, so Mario made sure to keep Takami moving forward. When Takami took his year test, he broke all of his records, so much so that after Mario thanked his superiors, He instructed one of his team members to buy Takami a gift to cheer him up. Then, with his wife attending a conference in Tokyo, Mario drove home to celebrate his newfound success on his own, ordering his favorite takeout and, while waiting for his food to arrive, searching his drink rack for a bottle of Karuizawa Samurai 1 to 10. Mario had just returned to his dining room, where he was about to settle down and celebrate the fruits of his labor, had it not been for his phone ringing. Groaning, he got up off the table and approached his couch from his suit jacket. Perhaps it was his wife phoning, and after a long day, Mario would be delighted to chat to her. However, when he took out his phone, Mario discovered that the number was unknown. "Henkito, this better not be you, damn it." Mario answered the phone. "What is it, Henkito?" "That's your 7th phone in the last 4 months," because he couldn't imagine anyone else having his phone and their contact information being lost. He walked back to the table after saying this. A voice said, "Good to hear that you haven't fired Henkito yet." A voice that marked the beginning of the end for him. A voice that, to be honest, he neither wanted to hear nor thought he would ever hear again. Mario stated, placing the phone down on the table and popping, "Hold on, if I'm going to talk with you then I'm going to need a drink first." Cork on his glass. Mario asked, "All right, who is this?" as he turned back to the phone after pouring a little vodka and sipping it. Inko answered in a playful tone, "I thought that's what the drink was for, Mario sir." Since they had long since parted ways, she most likely didn't enjoy making the call any more than Mario enjoyed receiving it. Mario poured himself another glass and replied, "Inko Midoriya, as I live and breathe. What could possibly possess you to call me after what you and your sister did to Project Velocity?" Before Inko spoke once more, it was a few moments. She spoke softly and in control when she did. "Sir, I did not contact you to vent my frustrations, but I know that my sister and I didn't always express our gratitude for everything you did for us. My departure from the program at such a critical moment was wrong, as was what my sister did when she killed those other heroes. I apologize for how things ended, but I appreciate everything you did for us, rescuing us from that predicament and teaching us how to be heroes." Mario had to recall the fabrication the HPSC had told the media, so he shook his head. Mario had put in a lot of effort and moved quickly to hide that mess, but judging by Inko's tone of voice, she knew it wasn't true. Mario thought that was odd, but if she was telling the truth, why would she be calling? If that were the case, she would never trust the HPSC in the future. Mario was intrigued and said, "Well, thank you for that. So what do I owe the pleasure of your call?" If Inko was aware of the whole story behind that day, he had to know. If she was aware of it, Mario and Kana might both wind up in Tartarus regardless of how well Takami performed on his test if Inko disclosed that information. "Sir, the day my sister got arrested, she called me." Mario became alarmed when the HPSC pursued Lady Nagant and there was no record of her making a call. Maybe Inko was aware of the truth. "I was the last one she talked to before she was captured." "Sir," the way she spoke, it sounded like she was being framed for killing those pro-heroes. In her final words to me she told me that we trusted the wrong person and now I believe that same person might try to hunt me and my family down. "I thought we had trained you to protect yourself in this situation and your husband is in America right now," Mario remarked, still attempting to ascertain whether or not Inko was telling the realities. Though she was unaware of the full tale, it was obvious that she didn't trust the version given to the media. Maybe Mario could save Inko's career and Project Velocity wasn't in jeopardy after all, as Kana hadn't disclosed any of that information. Mario nearly choked on his own tongue when he heard Inko take a big breath before saying, "Sir, Kana had a son." How could Kana conceal her child's existence from the media, let alone Maro and his team, given that she was never married? She tried her hardest to keep it a secret from everyone, including the HPSC, but in the end, she knew her job won't allow her to do that. "He acquired his quirk today, and to be honest, I don't know how to train him. I can't teach him how to use my sister's quirk without bringing up our past. I need help, and you and Project Velocity are the only people I know that can do so. Let her be a proper mother. She gave her son to Hisashi and me to raise." Perhaps the booze was to blame, or perhaps the desire to right previous wrongs and show that the initial Project Velocity trainees were not as disastrous as the HPSC Council had believed. Mario took in all of the new knowledge. Since Inko was ignorant of the reality, she continued to have faith in Project Velocity. Kana's son shared her peculiarity, therefore it would be just as strong, if not more so. Along with Takami, the HPSC would have 2 skilled heroes on staff if Mario could train this child to be a hero. Well, Mrs. Midoriya, it sounds like your family has many secrets it's kept, but your position sounds troublesome. And though there has been rough terrain between us in the past, what kind of servant would I be to this nation if I turned you and your son away? Mario replied as he poured a third glass. He got up from the table, paced the room, and grabbed it. Inko said, "Thank you, Mario sir." As I swirled the vodka in the glass, Mario replied, "I'll let the HPSC Council know about our chat and let you know when a time has been set aside for you and Inko uttered, "Izuku Midoriya." Mario recalled Kana's demeanor, Izuku to come into the faculty. "Oh, and Mrs. Midoriya, will there be any baggage this time?" She stated that she would only train in Project Velocity if her sister could accompany her, even though Inko's quirk didn't become powerful. Even though it had worked out well, Mario still considered it a risk and a gamble, and he didn't think his good fortune would last for very long. To keep Izuku from learning of his past, he has not been informed of Kana being his mother. He has always been registered as a Midoriya and I would like to keep it that way. That is all I ask for," Inko said. She had assured Kana that her son would never know the truth and that Izuku was a vulnerable child at the time. Should he? When he discovered the terrible secret of their family, it was inevitable that it would ruin him. Mario held up his cup like he was toasting and stated, "I know your sister was framed for her wrongdoing, but I will grant that request to keep your son out of the spotlight. No one will know who your son's real parents are." Although Takemi had maintained the program, it was Izuku who would demonstrate Project Velocity's success to the Japanese people. Inko said, "Good night, Mario, and thank you." Mario hung up the phone and finished the last of his drink, saying, "Good night, Mrs. Midoriya." Although the day was magnificent, the real victory came at night. Mario needed to work quickly since he knew he couldn't let this opportunity pass him by. Mario navigated to contacts, found Henkito's number, and dialed it. "Good evening, sir. What do you need?" was Henkito's first line when the call connected after the third ring. While he concentrated on getting things ready, Mario inquired, "Henkito, how would you feel about working some overtime?" He needed everything ready for when he stood in front of the HPSC Council. Thus timing was crucial. They would become aware of his team's training of Izuku, and Mario would undoubtedly be removed from the program if they felt that history would repeat itself. Mario couldn't let control to pass to someone else at that point. The program was his concept and dream, and he refused to give anyone else the credit for it. "On what, sir?" inquired Henkito. Mario declared, making Project Velocity what it was always meant to be, intending to save his career from being a laughing stock. That concludes Chapter 3. Fearing that someone is after her, Inko makes contact with Mario again and asks for assistance in training her son. Family. Mario accepted with greed, but he was aware that much effort needed to be done before things could go as planned. Rewrite. Knowing how I want the program to be perceived by different people, I add a little more to the beginning of Project Velocity. I haven't even started the large chapter on origins as part of this rewrite, but it will be a big chapter that will take some time to complete. In the subsequent chapter, Izuku is assessed to determine his suitability for the project. Mario then needs to persuade the HPSC Council overseeing Project Velocity that Izuku's training won't result in a historical recurrence. Reaffirming past promises is the next step. After reading, let me know what you think. Previous agreements made once more after my trip. I'm eager to resume working on my stories. The last time Inko begged for assistance from Project Velocity's director, strangely enough, that was last week. Izuku meets Mario this week and gains additional knowledge about Project Velocity. Will Izuku get admitted to Project Velocity, or will Mario's employer forbid the repetition of historical events? As always, I claim no ownership whatsoever over My Hero Academia or any of their characters. Alright, let's get started. Mirio worked with his staff the following day and the following week to prepare for Inko and Izuku's visit to their training faculty. Mirio merely disclosed the visit's objective to a small group of people that required to know, remaining evasive about the specifics. He intended to buy himself as much time as possible to settle all of this before the council learned of it. Mirio went through all of the physical and digital files until he came to the ones containing information about the sister of the Tsunami. He went through the information in the filing cabinet, which included test results, a nutrition plan to increase strength and stamina, and training schedules for judo, karate, and weightlifting as well as bukijutsu. Every day Mirio returned home tired but with an increasing sense of pride because he could see his dream of Project Velocity getting closer to reality. When everything was prepared at the end of the week, Mirio notified Inko over a secure connection. They promptly scheduled a time for Inko to bring Izuku in so they could test some of his peculiarities. After lunch, they ultimately decided on next Saturday, and Inko ended the call by expressing gratitude to her former buddy, and Mirio said he was glad to be of assistance once more. Mirio checked everything twice and 3 times even after everything was taken care of. When Izuku arrived, he only intended to have a small team consisting of himself and 4 other people. This gathering had the same level of secrecy as the original Project Velocity. A tiny group helps a young child who has a strong peculiarity become a hero. That was the purpose for which the program was designed from the start. On the day of the conference, Inko began working after a lengthy period of recuperation. All this week, her concern had not wavered. She couldn't help but think about her sister's predicament whenever she saw Izuku. It brought back memories of how Inko had not seen or spoken to her sister in a while. However, it was the cost of protecting herself and Izuku. And although Inko was unsure of Kaina's circumstances in Tartarus, she was certain her sister was considering the same thing. As Inko got out of bed and walked over to the window to open, the morning sunlight touched her face and she felt relaxed. Kaina always said she enjoyed looking up at the night sky and seeing the stars, but to Inko nothing could ever beat the sight of a beautiful sunrise. Inko looked at the rising sun and hoped that after a day her worry would become tempting. Turning away from the window, Inko headed downstairs and started making breakfast. As she worked in the kitchen, she heard the sounds of Izuku waking up and a few minutes later he walked into the kitchen. He yawned as he rubbed the sleep from his eyes and sat down at the table. "Izuku honey, we're going to meet up with some of Mom's old friends this afternoon. Is that all right with you?" Inko asked as she cracked a few eggs over a frying pan. She had decided to go with American-style scrambled eggs and toast. Let the egg cook. Inko pulled up a cabinet and grabbed the loaf of bread. At the safe timing using her Quirk to plug the toast, which she slipped the beard into and pulled it down. "But Kachan and I made plans to play with each other this afternoon. You said I couldn't show him my quirk until I had some control over it." "You said last night that I had control," Izuku said in a sad tone. He had worked so hard to learn how to control his quirk, he wanted so badly to show it to his best friends. They always talked about becoming the best pro heroes, and with their quirk, they could easily do so. Inko made the mistake of looking over at Izuku and saw his big pleading puppy eyes. Despite all her training to be a hero, her ability to either take down a villain or talk them out of something. With her ability to end hostage situations, disarm a bomb and go toe-to-toe with the best pro heroes, Inko barely lasted a few seconds looking at Izuku before she broke. Kaina and Hisashi always said she had a too soft spot for kids. "Okay. Katsuki can come along. I'm sure they'll love meeting him too," Inko said in a defeated tone as she turned back to making breakfast. She could hear Izuku doing a small celebration at winning the conversation. Inko couldn't believe how much she was wrapped around Izuku's little fingers, but she had promised her sister to be a loving mother. Once breakfast was made and eaten, Inko disappeared into her room to make sure everything was ready for the afternoon. While she did this, Izuku played in the front room by himself, waiting for his friend to come over. Around lunchtime, a knock came on the front door and Izuku giddily ran to and opened it. On the other side of the door was Izuku's best friend, Katsuki Bakugo. He was wearing a black shirt with a skull on it and tan pants. As Izuku opened up the door, Bakugo had his hands in his pocket as he looked at Izuku with an unimpressed face. Mom said you sounded pretty enthusiastic last night. So what's this thing you wanted to show me? Bakugo said as he walked into the house. Izuku closed the door and fell into step with his friends. My quirk, Izuku said, his voice starting to get fast. As he led his best friend to the dining room, a bounce appeared in his step. He had worked so hard to gain control over his quirk and it was so cool to him. That weird thing your arm did at school a week ago. I think I was the only one that saw that. I was going to say something but the principal's action made it obvious that no one was supposed to see it, Bakugo said as he and Izuku sat at the table. 2 sandwiches were waiting for them, making Izuku look into the kitchen to see his mother making herself one. Izuku tilted his head in confusion, since when had she been in the kitchen? So what's your quirk so mysterious? I bet it is not even cool, not like mine. Bakugo held a hand up and lit off a small explosion. Katsuki, no quirks in the house, Inko said from the kitchen. The second explosion quickly died in Bakugo's hand as a whiff of smoke appeared, then he had to wave out of his face. He then turned to Izuku and gave a confused look. My quirks can be a bit destructive, yours too, so Mom made the rule of no quirks in the house. To stop accidents from happening too often, Izuku explained as he thought back to when he first used his quirk in the house. Bakugo shrugged as he lowered his hand and went back to his sandwich. If you can't your quirk, then how are you going to show me? Izuku laughed as a mischievous grin that looked as if he had gotten away stealing a cookie from the jar appeared on his face. There's a difference between showing and using. Let's have lunch first. This caused Bakugo to laugh and they both quickly finished their lunch. Once their meal was eaten and they had put their plate in the sink, Izuku led Bakugo into the living room. Walking back into the living room, Izuku directed Bakugo to sit on the couch while he positioned himself on the floor between the couch and the ottoman. Izuku laid his arm across the ottoman and took a deep breath. Flexing his hand and forearm, Izuku felt a small tingly feeling appear as steam formed around his arm. He felt his forearm and hand change, expanding as he activated his quirk. A few seconds later, Izuku's shot forearm while hand and fingers narrowed and curled into a barrel. Resting on the ottoman was now a purple and green long-range rifle, and as Bakugo's mind recognized the change, he jumped a bit in his seat. As Bakugo settled down and lowered himself back down to the couch, he leaned forward to get a better look. Izuku's arm looked like a mixture between flesh and metal, and at the point of transformation, Izuku's veins were purple until they disappeared into his upper arm. What is it? Bakugo asked as neither of them had seen a gun before. They were still only 5 years old, and since Quirk had been inherited by 80% of the world's population, people had stopped carrying small firearms for personal protection. And while police carried around pistols, neither of the young boys had seen a gun that looked like Izuku's arm. My mom said it was a rifle. And get this, I can twirl my hair and weave them into bullets. Izuku said as he began to use his left hand to twirl a bit of his hair. After a few seconds, the hair solidified into a bullet that Izuku used to make a show out of loading the bullet. I haven't had a chance to get much practice. It is not as easy to hide as your quirk. Izuku looked at Bakugo and noticed his best friend had a weird look on his face. Izuku looked back at his arm, then back at his friends. Arm, friend, arm, friend. What? Izuku asked as Bakugo stared intently back at Izuku's arm. Midoriya, look at your arm. Bakugo finally said. That just confused Izuku further. Wasn't the whole point of this to show off his quirk? Maybe Bakugo found it weird to look at, or he found it cool, but then again that described most of the quirks that were heteromorphic. Either really cool or really weird, but Izuku couldn't tell which way Bakugo was leaning. I am. Izuku said in a sarcastic tone. No, I don't mean your right arm, cool by the way. I mean your left arm. You have a mark that wasn't there a few seconds ago, and Aunt Inko isn't going to let you get a tattoo. Bakugo said, lowering his voice to a whisper as he slid off the couch. He grabbed Izuku's left arm and rotated it so the inner side of his biceps was revealed. Izuku looked at his left bicep, confused about what his friend was trying to point out, and then he noticed it. It was small, easily mistakable as a Sharpie mess, or old carnival tattoo. But on Izuku's left bicep was a purple marking in the shape of a bullet. And Izuku was sure it wasn't there a few moments ago. "What do you think it's for?" Izuku said as he poked it. It didn't feel sore like a new tattoo should be, nor did it rub off like a temporary tattoo would have. Izuku then inspected the rest of his left arm to see if there were any other markings, but he didn't find any. "I don't know, but it wasn't there earlier," Bakugo said. At that moment Inko came into the living room and looked between the boys. "All right boys, it's time to head out," Inko said. She had just gotten off a call with Mitsuki where they talked about Izuku joining Project Velocity. Mitsuki had joked about how Katsuki should join the program if nothing else to learn some manners. Inko ended the call by calling Mitsuki buff, saying that Katsuki was welcome to join Izuku in training. Bakugo looked between Izuku and Inko. Where are we going?" "To meet some of Mom's old friends," Izuku said, hopping off the ground, and Bakugo followed him out of curiosity. Inko helped the boys load up in the car and then got in herself. After backing out of the driveway, Inko directed the car to the building where Project Velocity was stationed. On the drive there Inko thought back to the training she and Kana went through. In the beginning, it was tiresome. They trained more than just their quirks, their minds and bodies were put through the ringers too. Each day they were exhausted and they often fell asleep on their way home. Through that training, Inko became a strong woman, yet the life of a hero was something she never wanted. When she met Hisashi she felt marrying him was the only way out of becoming a pro-hero like her sister. But now she needed to protect her family from whoever hunted her sister. Izuku needed the same training, to learn how to use his quirk and how to protect himself. Within the hour they arrived at Project Velocity. Inko pulled the car into a parking spot and got out, as Izuku and Bakugo were right behind her. Izuku looked up at the building and thought it looked like it belonged to a corporate business. He looked at Inko and said, "Mom, I thought we were going to meet some of your old friends." The Midoriya family had never really been that wealthy, nor had they been associated with upper-class workers. Hisashi was working in America and sent money home, but his pay barely covered the house and his apartment. The closest was the Bakugo family and Masaru's work in the fashion business, but they didn't live a wealthy lifestyle, nor did Mitsuki Bakugo act like a rich woman. However, in Inko's mind, she definitely pushed the envelope. "We are," Inko said as she walked up the stairs and opened one of the doors. She then turned around and gestured for the boys to follow her. Izuku and Bakugo looked at each other, grins appearing on their faces as they took off after Inko. She led the duo to an elevator and once inside pressed the button for the 5th floor. As the trio rode the elevator Izuku looked at Inko and asked, "Mom, who are we exactly going to meet?" His mother never mentioned having friends who worked in a building like this. Inko sighed, then looked down at the ground. "Zuzu, do you remember that conversation we had when you first got your quirk?" Izuku gave a small nod. "Your mother knows some people that specialize in training young kids with powerful quirks, such as yours and Katsuki's. They help kids like you learn how to use their quirks and become heroes." From that, Izuku got a big smile while Bakugo got a feral one. Now that they knew what was happening, neither of them could wait to show off their quirks and what they could do with it. Yet it seemed to take forever before the elevator arrived on the 5th floor and opened. Once the door opened they were met with an amazing sight. A kid, only a few years older than Izuku and Bakugo, with bright red wings, was flying around the floor. As he flew around, feathers from his wings shot out and hit targets of varying sizes. These targets were placed all around the floor and the kid hadn't missed a single one. Izuku and Bakugo watched as the kid hit the last target with 3 feathers and then landed right next to a table. As the kid looked at the adults, all the feathers that had been shot into the targets dislodged themselves and returned to the red wings on the kid's back. Standing at the table were Fumiko Murio and 4 members of his team. Murio looked up from a monitor screen and said to the kid, "Well done Takami, you beat your previous record by 3.5 seconds. Keep up that pace and you'll be on the level of a pro hero by the time you're a teenager." The kid nodded as pulled a blindfold down from his eyes. Izuku hadn't noticed the blindfold as the kid was flying around, making the kid's skill even more impressive. The red-winged kids looked at the different targets. He then turned back to Mirio and said, I thought the targets were supposed to be in different places. A lot of them felt like they hadn't moved. They were. Mirio paused and then looked over the targets. A lot of them seemed to be in the same location as last time. He then turned to his workers and sighed. This caused the woman to flicker and defend herself with, I haven't gotten much sleep because of your little side project. So sue me. Mirio sighed again, as he folded his arm and brought a hand up to pinch the bridge of his nose. She was a good worker, one of the best for the program, but all the work Mirio had to put in to cover her. Forgetful behavior. Some days were harder than others. Henkito. What am I going to do with you? The employee, now identified as Henkito, looked ready to defend herself but then noticed Inko and the two boys. The gears of her mind were visible as she took a few moments to recognize Inko. Once she did, she got a big smile and yelled, Inko, is that you? Before running over and hugging Inko. Inko had to brace as Henkito was a forgetful person and with her strength enhancement quirk. A hug from Henkito could break a few ribs. Luckily Henkito didn't squeeze too hard and Inko was able to still breathe. Inko hugged Henkito back and asked, how's life been since I last saw you last? Henkito didn't answer but just continued to smile until Mirio and the other present members of Project Velocity came over. After Henkito released her, Inko bowed to Mirio and thanked him again for his assistance. Mrs. Midoriya, it is good to see you again. Mirio then noticed there was more than one kid. One that Inko hadn't mentioned. Excuse, but I was informed you only had one child, yet I see two. One who does not have much of your or your husband's genetics. Inko chuckled a bit then clarified, this is Katsuki Bakugo, he's the son of one of my friends. I thought you might like to examine his quirk as well as my son's. I promise you won't be disappointed. Bakugo. You mean that hot-headed loud-mouth friend of yours? Henkito said, then quickly covered her mouth. She looked at Inko as if she had just killed Inko's dog right in front of her. Yet Inko didn't seem too worried, simply waving Henkito's worry away with a hand. I'm sure she's been called worse and what she doesn't know won't hurt her. Inko could recall that Bakugo's first name for Mitsuki wasn't Mama, it was just straight to Old Hag. Mirio looked over the two boys, knowing it was just better to go along with it rather than figure out what part Bakugo played in all this. Hello Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo. I'm looking forward to what you will show us today. But first I would like you three to meet Keigo Takami. He's the second wave of Project Velocity trained heroes. If you're accepted into the program then you'll be spending some time training with him, Mirio said, as Takami walked up to the group. Takami looked between Izuku and Bakugo then bowed and said, it's nice to meet you both, please call me Keigo. I'm looking forward to training with both of you. Mr. Mirio held you in high regard, enough to make his team go without sleep for a week. Takami I didn't, Mirio said, then looked around at the members of his team. Many had small rings under their eyes and their shoulders were hunched over. Only Henkito seemed to be the only one with energy. But that might be just because she forgot how tired she was. Alright, head home all of you. I told you to work fast, not work yourself into your graves. I can handle the evaluation by myself. Sir, are you sure? One of the employees asked as it was unusual to be sent home this early in the day. Project Velocity didn't have a set-in-stone schedule for most things, as most of the timing was determined by how fast the trainee learned and improved. Yet to be sent home only a few hours after the business day started. Yes, now go, Mirio said, and not wanting to wait around for him to change his mind, the members of Project Velocity quickly gathered their things and left. Takami looked at Mirio with a look asking to be excused. Sorry Takami, but you'll be staying. If you are going to train with these boys, then you need to see their level of control. Takami didn't say a word, just gave a small nod. Mirio then turned to Izuku and Bakugo and said, how about a small demonstration of your quirks, then I'll set up some small tests for you to go through. Midoriya, how about we start with you? Mirio prepared as he needed to act as if he had never seen a quirk like Izuku before. to make it seem that Izuku's quirk itself was unique to Izuku. Izuku nodded and lifted his right arm. Mirio was ready to see Izuku contort into a weird angle, but his eyes grew as smoke appeared around Izuku's arm. The next second Izuku's quirks took hold and his right arm was transformed, extending and building to a rifle. Mirio held his breath as he looked over Izuku's quirk. It was so similar yet so different from Kana's. The same sleek barrel design, but Izuku's rifle had a forestock and a body. It had no area for a magazine, yet instead of loading a bullet through his hand as Kana had to do, where the charging bolt would be on a normal rifle, there was a small slot. Well, young man, that is quite impressive. How about you give us a demonstration of your quirk? Pick a target and show us what you've got, Mirio said as he felt the joy of being able to correct past mistakes once again. This time Mirio would have to play his card close to his chest, to compartmentalize information so no one knew more than they needed to. But if this worked out, Mirio knew he could become head of a new hero program, one that could produce more heroes at a higher quality than any hero school could. Izuku looked around and quickly spotted a target. It was up in a corner, perhaps 100 feet away, and there were no other targets that were blocking it. Izuku took a knee as he gripped the barrel of his quirk with his left hand, resting his left arm on his left knee to help keep his right arm steady. Izuku found this position to be very comfortable. He had complete control of where he was aiming. There was no sway in his arm as it stayed perfectly still. Mirio noticed this too, as Kana had often assumed a similar pose early in her training whenever she didn't have anything to rest her barrel against. It wasn't a bad form, but in combat, it was a pose that left Izuku and Kana vulnerable to almost all angles. Izuku lined up his aim the best he could, then flexed his right arm. A loud gunshot went off, causing everyone that could to cover their ears. They all watched as the green and purple bullet whizzed through the air and soon struck the target. It wasn't a bullseye, not even within the inner circles. Izuku had barely even hit the target in the first place. Yet Mirio was still impressed. Izuku had only had his quirk for 2 weeks, and though it was clear he hadn't had much practice, Izuku definitely had a talent for using his quirk. Through practice, Izuku could quickly get to the same level as long-range pro heroes such as Snipe. One day he might even be able to give Kana a run for her money. A well-placed shot, young Midoriya, and with how short of a time you've had your quirk, you most certainly do have a talent for it. Now, anything else you would like to show about your quirk? Mirio asked. Izuku nodded his head, then weaved some of his hair into a bullet. I can weave my hair into my ammo. Mirio nodded as if he had heard nothing about that piece of information. He then turned to Bakugo and said, now I believe it's young Bakugo's turn. Inko seemed to be under the impression that Bakugo would be fit for Project Velocity, yet that particular decision wouldn't be up to Mirio. The HPSC Council would be the ones to decide whether Mirio would be allowed to train either of the boys. Mirio hadn't many interactions with Mitsuki and Mararu, only having met them for the first time at Inko's wedding, as Mitsuki had been one of Inko's maids. If he remembered correctly, Mitsuki's quirk allowed her to sweat glycerin, while Marisu's quirk allowed him to secrete acidic sweat that could cause small explosions. Mirio got a small smile at what a perfect combination could result from those quirks, and if Bakugo had it. Mirio was pulled from his thoughts as Bakugo stepped forward and said, I'll show you, old man. With my quirk, I'm going to make me the next #1 hero. Bakugo raised his hand in a cupped formation and let off a good-sized explosion. Later, after reviewing the security footage, Mirio measured the explosion to be about the size of a large SUV. But for now, Mirio got a big grin on his face as fate had just handed him 2 extremely powerful quirks on a silver platter. Project Velocity's future was brighter than Mirio could even predict. He had to train Izuku and Bakugo, even if he had to fight against the HPSC Council or the board. Mirio was going to do everything he could to show the masterpiece that is Project Velocity. Mirio cleared his throat as he turned to Inko and said, "Too impressive quirk. Perfect fit for Project Velocity. Something I'm sure the council will see that for themselves without much explanation. Let's have you return in 3 days' time and we'll begin their training." Inko bowed slightly to show her appreciation, then turned to Izuku and Bakugo. Alright, it's time to leave, boys. But we just got here. We want to use our quirks, Izuku said. They had barely been here for 10 minutes and barely had a chance to use their quirks. Mirio smiled and said, boys, you'll have plenty of chances to use your quirks in the future, but for now the best you can do is listen to your mothers. Just remember, when you train without a direction in mind, then you'll never move forwards. With that word of advice, Izuku and Bakugo accepted Inko's hand and she walked them to the elevator. Neither of them could wait until they could train with their quirks. Though their reason for wanting to be heroes were different, they both wanted to give their best to become #1 hero. They both admired All Might, the symbol of peace, and now they had the opportunity to train to become heroes like him. And that's the latest chapter of Project Velocity. Somehow Katsuki Bakugo gets roped into going to Project Velocity. Will he be allowed to train alongside Ayaka Midoriya, or will the Hero Public Safety Commission not allow either of them to be trained? Will Mirio be about to convince the council that mistake of the past will not be made again, or will his control or the program be restricted even further? Next time. Meeting of Fate review, and next me what you think. Meeting of Fate. It's time for the 5th chapter of Project Velocity. Mirio now is to convince the HPSC Council that by training Izuku Midoriya, event of the past will not occur again. Time to find out if he can. As always, I do not own any rights to My Hero Academia or any of their characters. With that, let's start with a bang. After sending Takami home, Mirio finished up some paperwork and then went home. As he settled down for the evening, his phone buzzed. Mirio pulled it out and saw a text that he had been expecting for days. Fumiko Mirio, for violating Section 10 to 15B of Project Velocity set by its council, you are to appear before the council in 2 days, at which your recent choices will be questioned and your viability as acting director over the program will be decided. Mirio sighed as he turned his phone off and tossed it onto his nightstand. He wasn't too worried. He knew eventually the council would hear about it. And now he knew they had been told by one of the 4 members of Project Velocity that had been there today. He wanted to figure out who the mole was because he hated how much of a hold the council had over his program. But now that would have to be put on the back burner, as the next day Mirio gathered everything he had been personally preparing over the past week. In the evening he caught a plane to Tokyo. Then 2 days after Mirio had met Izuku and Bakugo, he was standing in front of the Project Velocity Council. A group of HPSC workers that had been selected to oversee the program were also the ones that decided whether Mirio was allowed to stay within the program. And as Mirio was not going to lose his life mission, he made sure one last time everything was in order before he left his hotel room. One way or another he was going to make sure Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo were brought into Project Velocity. He didn't care how much convincing it took. Something he didn't think would take much. He was ready to pull out all the stop. He had the security footage of their tests, just to show the strength of their quirks. He had their state-issue quirk documents. He had even managed to get their grade from school to show how smart they were. And it was not lost on him that some on the council liked the idea of having pro-heroes trained by them and purely on their payroll. Mirio arrived at the Hero Public Safety Commission headquarters, and after scanning his ID, Mirio headed to the elevator. He rode the elevator up to the 39th floor. Once the elevator doors opened, Mirio walked out and headed over to the reception desk. He put his ID card on the desk and said, "Fumiko Mirio, reporting for the meeting at 10 o'clock. The receptionist took Mirio's ID and scanned it. Once the light turned green, she returned the ID to Mirio and said, "Please have a seat, you'll be called when they're ready." After taking and slipping his ID card back into his wallet, Mirio turned away from the reception desk and walked over a grouping of chairs. He selected one of the chairs and sat down as he rested his briefcase against the side of the chair. With nothing else to do, Mirio thought about what he was going to say, as his word choice was going to be very important in the meeting. 15 minutes later, the receptionist called out, "Mirio, they're ready for you." Mirio thanked the receptionist as he grabbed his briefcase and stood up. He walked over to the set of double doors and closed the handle. He let out a slow breath and pulled the door open. On the other side, he was expecting to see the HPSC Council, and he did. Yet what he was not prepared for was to see Madam President of the Hero Public Safety Commission and Prime Minister Kuma Renzo in their respective chairs. Convincing the council was easy. Murio had personally known them for years and knew the kind of people there were. Yet there were two or some of the highest authorities in Japan, and Murio had only met Madam President twice in person. As Murio met the eyes of Prime Minister Renzo, he bowed and said, "Madam President, Prime Minister Renzo. I was unaware that you would be joining us for this meeting." "Yes, but Council Member Takuma had the mind to inform us of your two potential recruits. After the success of Keigo Takami, codenamed Hawks, your control over Project Velocity was limited but reinstated. Part of that limit was power given to this council to oversee any part of the program, checks and balances as our American friends put in their beginning. Power which was not only given to this council to myself and Prime Minister Renzo. Power something you seem to have forgotten," Madam President said as she sternly looked at Murio. Her eyes were narrow and focused on Murio, with her lips pursed showing her readiness to finally put Murio in his grave. "I remember that agreement quite well. You are allowed to limit my control of Project Velocity should it appear that events of the past were to occur again," Murio said as he sat down in his chair and put his briefcase on the table. Whenever Madam President took it upon herself to check on Project Velocity, Murio always had to hold his tongue around her. He didn't like that he had lost his project to her control. Events of the past were to occur again. That does seem to be the future of Project Velocity, or did you not think it was important to think of that when you brought Izuku Tsutsumi in the other day? Madam President said. That was merely a power assessment, Inko Midoriya calling in a favor for her son. Nothing beyond old friends, Murio said. Do you honestly believe that we would believe that? It's clear that you want to bring Izuku Tsutsumi into Project Velocity. We all know the possible future that comes from that, or are you too blind by correcting your past mistakes to see that? Madam President said, and Murio began to speak, but he was cut off. We know you are watering the idea of using Kana Tsutsumy's children, Izuku Midoriya. If you wish to train him, turn into a pro-hero. And as it seems your method have not changed, how can you guarantee that events of the past do not occur again? True intentions, Madam? Murio asked, knowing where Madam President was going. It was the same argument she had used to gain control from Murio. Her press corps was right. Once people learned of Project Velocity, they would think the HPSC was working on creating a privatized army. However, Murio never thought that way of thinking could come from someone within the HPSC. Was your original plan for Project Velocity not to train future heroes from a young age to become war dogs for the Hero Public Safety Commission? Madam President asked as she drew out a folder. Murio recognized his original proposal plan from when he was trying to get Project Velocity sanctioned. Murio looked at the folder. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. He tossed them onto the table, making sure the flash drive keychain was one on top. I never used that terminology, something I remind myself weekly. I used the flash drive as needed to remind myself what Project Velocity was designed to be. Its purpose was to train pro-heroes that were upheld to the quality wanted and needed by the Hero Public Safety Commission. Something that, and I know I don't stand alone in this, many pro-heroes are lacking in. A politician's way of saying war dogs, and isn't that what you got? Lady Nagant, skills given to her to make her obedient to the HPSC. She didn't question her orders, the wrong kind of soldier. I would call that a war dog, an obedient one at that. Yet eventually her humanity caught up in the end, and because of that she killed my predecessor. Madam President said, a small smirk appearing on her face. She was playing it perfectly to make it seem that Project Velocity just needed to be disbanded. That was what she had been trying to do from the beginning, as she had her program to train young heroes. Yet it would never get off the ground as long as Project Velocity was still around. Madam President, are you insinuating that this council is corrupt and ordering Lady Nagant to kill others in cold blood without anything more than personal agendas? Murio asked. He would not have Project Velocity, a program that was nothing more than a program to help teach and train young kids with powerful quirks how to become heroes, name be dragged through the mud. Yet the thought of a military-style army could be formed from the idea of Project Velocity, but that was never the true purpose of the program. I am not insinuating anything of the sort, Mr. Murillo, Madam President said, her voice becoming stern. She had a chance to finally knock Murillo's legs out from under him, and she would not be losing this time. Project Velocity should be nothing more than a stepping stone for her program and her career. Madam President and Murillo looked at each other until Prime Minister Renzo cleared his throat. Everyone immediately looked at him as he adjusted his collar. Madam President, I am aware of how hard you have voted to terminate Fumiko Murillo's position over Project Velocity. You believe he was the sole reason the program failed in its first trial, yet as I have reviewed the history of this program, I have found Mr. Murillo was not the sole issue with the program. Many decisions he made were contributory to the result, but not the main factor, and like any new idea, there were bound to be obstacles to overcome. Murillo began to smile. Mr. Murillo, do not think that is justification for the failure that occurred, as it was still on your watch. Failures were going to happen, but the one that happened was unexpected and could have been prevented if certain choices or actions had occurred. Despite this, I believe Fumiko Murillo is still the best man to occupy his position as head of Project Velocity. His success with the young hawk has shown that if nothing else, he and his program can and are willing to improve themselves until they become what they were always meant to be. Thank you, sir, Murillo said quickly, standing up and bowing. However, Mr. Murillo, it does seem that you have forgotten the history of Project Velocity. Please explain to me and these fine people why training Izuku Midoriya and his friend Katsuki Bakugo would not allow history to repeat itself. So let us start with their quirk, Katsuki Bakugo first. Prime Minister Renzo said. Muro took a breather. They were getting to the part where he was in control. Yes, sir. Katsuki Bakugo. Quirk. Explosion. This quirk allows him to secrete a substance similar to liquid nitroglycan within the palm of his hands. He can ignite the liquid on command, allowing him to create destructive explosions. The more he sweats, the more powerful his explosions can become, though dehydration is suspected to occur sooner than normal. What of his personality? In the video footage, he acted straight forward. Prime Minister Renzo commented as Bakugo was quick to show off his quirk and act smug about it. He's a hard-headed kid, I will admit to that, but his heart is in the right place. He believes he can be the next #1 hero, better than All Might. And he has the drive to back that up. In the short time since he has gained his quirk, his understanding and control over the fundamentals of his quirk is beyond that of a middle school student. He's to the point where he understands how the positioning and formation of his hands can affect his quirk. In the security footage, Katsuki Bakugo can be seen cupping his hand together before igniting his sweat. He did this because he understood what it meant, giving him more control of the direction of his quirk. Murillo said as he opened his briefcase and pulled out a photo taken from the security footage when Bakugo's explosion was at its peak. He slipped it down the table and managed to stop it right in front of Prime Minister Renzo. Prime Minister Renzo grabbed the photo and turned it around to look at it. With training from Project Velocity, I believe that one day he may begin to use his quirk to gain spatial advantage. Using a series of explosions to get him to hover in the air, each in turn could allow him to attack from any angle. More of an endeavor than an All Might, Madam President said. Dislike for the #20 hero was common among the HPSC, even the bottom of the totem pole workers. All his activities and battles created a lot of paperwork for them to do. In a way, yes, but I believe without the worst qualities, Murillo said, a bit surprised he and Madam President were able to agree on something. Through something such as that wasn't that big of a victory in Murillo's book. Prime Minister Renzo let go of the photo and focused on Murillo. And what of Izuku Midoriya? He is the main concern for this council, as we have seen in the past what can occur. Lady Nagant was a powerful and skilled hero, so what words do you have to convince us that you should be allowed to train him to become a pro hero? Prime Minister Renzo said. Thank you, Prime Minister Renzo. Izuku Midoriya has the same quirk as his mother Rifle. When using his quirk, Midoriya's forearm and hand transform into the barrel and body of a long-range rifle. This allows him to shoot bullets weaved from his hair at long distances. Instead of inserting ammunition through his hand, Midoriya does so through a small hole on his forearm. His ammo count and range are unknown at the moment. And for his personality, I can explain it all in a few words. Izuku Midoriya does not know who he is, Mirio said. Through this training, Izuku was going to be a good showing of nature versus nurture. If Izuku never knew he was the son of a notorious killer, then the only way he could become evil was through his unknown nature. Expound. Madam President said, leaning back in her chair. She had fought hard to have Mirio kicked off of Project Velocity, but now it seemed he had lost his mind. Even if he was allowed to train Izuku Midoriya, all Madam President would have to do is wait for Mirio's plan to blow up in his face. In short, Izuku Midoriya does not know that Kana Tsutsumi, Lady Nagant, is his mother. Nor does her sister Inko Midoriya know what occurred that day over a year ago. Mrs. Midoriya knows the story given to the media is not the truth. I'm sure she would have been able to figure that out on her own. More to the point, she does not know the truth. She believes that her sister was being hunted, and when Tsutsumi escaped, the people that were after her framed her for killing those heroes. This has led to Inko Midoriya believing that someone hunted down her sister, and now those same people may be after her and her son. That is why she contacted me. She wants to protect her son and help him become a pro-hero. I asked if Izuku Midoriya knew who he really was, and Mrs. Midoriya informed that he had been lied to. Izuku Midoriya with his entire being believes himself to be the son of Inko and Hisashi Midoriya and has no knowledge of Kana Tsutsumi or his connection to her. Mirio explained. What if the boy was to learn the truth? The media has not mentioned Lady Nagant since the month after her betrayal, yet once this boy became a hero, the media of the past is sure to question his connection to her. Evidence will be brought to light, and the boy may come to question his past. He may question who he is and may seek his biological mother out. He'll have more than a few questions for her, and what do you think he'll do when he tells the truth? Prime Minister Renzo asked, keeping a neutral expression. Hiding the truth will be difficult when that time comes, but for now the past can stay hidden without much help. When Izuku Midoriya learns the truth, then it will be at an age when it will not affect him, Mirio said. What do you mean? Can you be sure by training Tsutsumi that you aren't creating a worse problem? Madam President said. It shouldn't matter when it acts. When the truth comes to light, Izuku's world would shatter. Something Madam President was counting out, something she was going to make happen. Madam President, if I may be so bold to ask a question of my own. What is starting Izuku Midoriya from becoming a pro-hero in the first place? Mirio asked in a strong voice that caught Madam President off guard. He used her silence to answer his question, nothing. If it's not through Project Velocity, then it will be through the means everyone does so. He'll train himself, make himself ready for any test from any hero school. Who's to say Mrs. Midoriya won't be the one training him? Either Izuku Midoriya becomes a hero through us or through UA, and who would you rather have to control over him? All Project Velocity would be doing is damage control, so when he turns learn the truth. He had trust in us, and at the least we'll be able to stop him. Madam President scoffed and said, what to stop UA from kicking Tsutsumi out? They wouldn't be too happy once they see his quirk. Then what's to stop Midoriya from turning into a vigilante? He wants to be a hero badly. To protect those around him. Or worse, he could become a villain looking for revenge. I think the principal of UA would be able to see that too. Can you? Mirio said, but didn't let Madam President get a word in. He let out a breath and continued with, there's many possibilities that we can choose from. Enlisting Izuku Midoriya into gives us best control of choosing the option we want. Are you sure this is the best option? Prime Minister Renzo said. I see possibilities. First, Midoriya gives up on being a pro-hero, unlikely to happen. Second, Midoriya becomes a pro-hero through UA and never learns the truth. Third, Midoriya becomes a pro-hero through the program and never learns the truth. Both of these are possible. Fourth is Midoriya becomes a pro-hero through UA and Learns the truth once people, teachers, students see his quirk. He shunned, and after enough time became something less than heroic, then as per usual we've the ones that have to deal with it. Fifth, he becomes a pro-hero through Project Velocity, and when he learns the truth, he has enough trust in us. I see the fifth being the best, because we'll be able to control what he sees, what he hears and what he learns. We train him to be mentally strong enough to take the truth. Teaching him Tat can be a hero despite what everyone thinks. Murillo looked at Prime Minister Renzo, who stayed silent for minutes. Every second Murillo could feel his heart beating inside his chest. He understood this truly between him and Madam President and Prime Minister Renzo's say was the only one that mattered. Murillo kept his focus on Prime Minister Renzo. At some point, Prime Minister Renzo stood up, pushing his chair back as he did so. He looked Murillo dead in the eyes and said, "Fumiko Murillo, you are being entrusted to train Izuku Midoriya and his friend Katsuki Bakugo. You are to train them to become pro-heroes, but with the trust to ensure the past does not occur again. And with the knowledge that if you fail your obligations, your life will be forfeit to the government of Japan. You will strip off your title as acting director, your work will be destroyed, your name branded worse than villains, and you will spend the rest of your life making up for the lives taken by Izuku Tsutsumi. Do you understand?" Murillo swallowed his tongue and bowed as he forced out, "Yes, sir." "You may leave," Prime Minister Renzo said and pointed to the door behind Murillo. Murillo came out of his bow and grabbed his briefcase. He began to walk to the door but stopped. He then looked back over his shoulder at Prime Minister Renzo and asked, "If fate finds an ill opinion of me, sir, what would become of my wife? If sin falls, then it will rest squarely on your shoulder. But understand those that would be touched if that should happen. Your wife will be barred, Inko Midoriya as well. The blame will fall squarely on you, but it won't only be your fate touched," Prime Minister Renzo said. "I understand, sir," Murillo said with a nod, then held out of the door. He felt his heart pounding on his chest. He needed to calm his nerves. Why did he have to give up smoking? And that's Chapter 5 of Project Velocity. Murillo has gotten permission to train Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo, with the threat against his own life. And what was going on with Madam President and her program? Will she try to undermine Project Velocity and have Izuku Midoriya seen as a villain? Will she stop at nothing to get her own program off the ground? Next time we get to see a bit for Izuku and Bakugo's training and how they use it do some good for those around them. Next week. Training begins review and tell me what you think. Training begins. It's time to see what kind of training Izuku and Bakugo will receive now that they are a part of Project Velocity. How will it help them become better heroes? Alright, time for a bit of a confession. Originally after last chapter, the story was supposed to do a bit of time skip to a few months before the UA entrance exam. And the training arc of the next few chapters didn't exist. As I edited and got ready to post last chapter, I had to have a talk with myself about whether I would do the time skip or try to create a training arc, since I'm not the best at writing training arcs. I spent half an hour going over this in my head, and the biggest factor was in the story I wish to publish as a book. There's going to be at least one massive training arc. And I need to start gaining that skill at some point. So the follow chapter is really my first attempt at a training arc of any kind. Will I eventually come back and rewrite to make it better? Shakes Magic 8 Ball. It says, most likely. But that will most likely not be until much later this year, maybe even beginning of next year. But as always, I do not own any rights to My Hero Academia or any of their characters. With that, fingers crossed, let's start with a bang. Once Murillo returned home, he held a small celebration with his wife. While his wife was always supportive of her husband's antics, she did have some concerns over Izuku being the son of Lady Nagant. But she had also walked the girls growing up. She had a soft spot for them. She did prefer Inko, but Mrs. Murillo was happy with how much Kana wanted to protect her younger sister. Murillo promised that she would be able to meet the boys as well, but it won't be for some time. The following Sunday was the start of everything. Izuku and Bakugo were brought back to the training facility, along with Inko and Mitsuki. Once in the building, they rode the elevator up to the 5th floor, where they found Mirio waiting for them. When they walked out of the elevator, he turned away from an overturned whiteboard and looked at them, putting a smile on for them. Good afternoon and good news, the council has approved the training of Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo. Today will be day 1 of their training to become pro heroes. I'm pretty new to this and Inko has explained a bit, but how exactly will you be training our sons? Mitsuki asked. She had never had an interest in becoming a pro hero. She had always chosen to be a fashion model as her dream career and she didn't expect there to be much overlap. It was actually her pursuit of fashion design that sparked her friendship with Inko. Inko always claimed that it was because Mitsuki wouldn't leave her alone, but Mitsuki just saw it as giving some much-needed friendly advice. Mirio gave a small chuckle as he walked back to the whiteboard and flipped it around. Anticipating this, I took the liberty of writing some stuff down. On the whiteboard were several different items ranging from nutritional balance to increase muscle growth and recovery time, to the amount of training that would be done each day to maximize growth in skill and muscles, while not damaging the body. Mitsuki and Inko looked over the board. Inko didn't remember Project Velocity being this organized when she was being trained. It seemed in the years since she left, the program had become more refined. The two mothers looked down on their sons, as it was clear they had a lot of work they would have to deal with. Yet they looked more eager than ever before. This is Inko paused as she tried to figure out the best word to use. A bit much, Mitsuki said, not worrying about finding the right word. They're only 5 years old. Mirio looked at the board and saw how misleading it could be. Oh, forgive me, much of this information wouldn't come into play until later. But Inko was you can Project Velocity has come a long way since your time here. Mirio flipped the whiteboard back around. For now we'll begin with the basics. Learning what limits their quirks have. But you have their government quirk files. Mitsuki pointed it out. Mirio worked for the HPSC, so he should be able to easily get a hold of any government document. Before Mirio could ask, Inko did so. A file can tell a story, but not the whole story. When I first joined the program, it was believed that I could only pull small objects to me. But as my quirk was tested and stretched, I learned that I could do more than just pull small objects to me. I had telekinesis in its entirety. Precisely, that is why it's common for someone to change their quirk file as they get older, as they come to better understand how their quirk works. It happens all the time, even with more common style quirks. No two quirks are exactly the same, it's those little differences that can be the most important. We don't have that much time, so step 1 is figuring out how exactly their quirks work. How does that sound, boys? Mirio asked, looking at Izuku and Bakugo. They looked at each other, then back at Mirio and began nodding their heads. They couldn't wait to learn what the limits of their quirks were. How powerful they were, how powerful they could become. If it meant getting one step closer to becoming a pro hero, then they were up for anything and they were excited. Mirio chuckled a bit at their enthusiasm, hopeful they would keep it over the years. It would be important to keep it as the driving force that got them out of bed every day and continue training. For the rest of the day, Mirio ran tests to have a better understanding of their quirk. At the end of the day, Mirio sent them home with the homework that they needed to think of unique ways to use their quirks. Didn't matter if it looked stupid or useless, any kind of skill could have its uses. Over the next month, Mirio trained with the boys and the range of their quirks. Izuku learned the range of his quirk was a mere 200 meters, but through training and practice, he was able to slowly increase that range and his accuracy. He was able to place nearly every shot into the center of the target, something he always smiled at no matter how often he got a bullseye. Bakugo focused on his quirk recoiling on his body and how he could use the momentum generated by his explosion to move around his enemy and attack from different angles. They often came home Sunday evenings exhausted, and this caused their mother to believe their schoolwork would suffer, but every Monday they were up out of bed and eager to go to school. The boy paid attention in class and was the top student, earning the highest scores in each of their classes. Especially PE. Their education grew so quickly they were easily months ahead of their fellow classmates. So part of training became further their education. Yet no matter how hard the week was or how long it felt, On Saturday morning the two of them were as excited as ever to train. In the coming year, as the two practiced with their quirks, they gained a strong fundamental understanding of their quirks. By the time of his 6th birthday, Izuku was able to increase his range to 300 meters and learned that he could hold a total of 60 bullets, and he could hold them for 2 weeks before they disappeared and needed to be replaced. On the other hand, Bakugo learned that while his quirk was mainly in his hands, if he focused long enough he could get a smaller explosion to form around his body. With every new skill they learned, they practiced and trained until they had perfected it. By the time they were 7, they had skills that most first-year hero students didn't. But that didn't stop them, as Izuku and Bakugo would spend evenings together thinking of new ways to use their quirk. Many ideas were found to be just impossible, while there were a few that would have to wait until their bodies and quirks were stronger. This irked Takami a bit, using younger kids easily matching up to his skill levels. He refused to be beaten by some brats. Though that didn't diminish his friendship with them, he enjoyed hanging out with them, even coming over to either of their houses for dinner often. Their time together was mostly spent training under the program. They tried to get together outside of training. Once Mario was sure the two of them had an adequate handle on their quirk, he moved them onto the skill part of training. Martial arts, it being decided that karate and judo would best suit them, then beginning bukajutsu once Mitsuki and Inko were comfortable with their son handling weapons. It was 2 weeks after Izuku's 7th birthday and it was Mitsuki's train to drive them in. And as Mario had called the previous night telling them he had a surprise for them, Izuku and Bikaugo were very eager to arrive. Once Mitsuki parked the car and unlocked the doors, Bakugo and Izuku rushed out of the car. Mitsuki cursed a bit as she fumbled to get out of the car and had to run after them, all the way screaming, "Wait, you like maggot? Stress doesn't look good on me." Mitsuki managed to catch up to them as they ran through the front doors. However, she wasn't able to catch her breath until they got into the elevator. She shot a glare at the two of them as she was doubling over and breathing heavily. Mitsuki was in good shape. She had to be a fashion model, but there was a difference between a fashion model and a professional athlete. Mitsuki was still catching her breath as the elevator arrived on the 5th floor and Izuku and Bakugo rushed out. They found Mario waiting for them, his kind smile very evident. And behind him were two people dressed in martial arts attire, both having black belts tied around their waists. The gentleman on Mario's right was of a large frame and tall stature. He held a narrow look on the boys, as he had his hands folded against his chest. His black hair was cut to right above his shoulder and slicked back so as not to impede his vision. He had a weathered look, with a scar that started under his left ear followed back his jawline and ended at his chin. He looked over the two boys, their strength evident in their tiny frames. The woman on Mario's left was of a shorter stature and smaller frame, but she didn't look less immediate. Her blonde hair was braided behind her head and went down to her waist. Her piercing green eyes made it feel as if her stare was going straight through Izuku and Bakugo. She gave an animalistic smile that she knew put her co-workers on edge. She was going to enjoy seeing what the two were made of. And while the man was barefoot and had no gloves, the woman had a pair of fingerless gloves and socks on. "Good morning, boys. I'm glad to see you are as eager to train as ever. Today I would like you to meet your new instructors. Sensei Hikaku and Sensei Hitomu are hero public safety workers, but they are masters of the art of karate and judo. And they have agreed to train you too. You will train with your respective sensei, and then every 2 weeks you will switch and train with the other sensei. And when they agree you have the basics down, you will be trained on how to use your new skills in tandem with your quirks. Any questions?" Mario asked, and when neither of the young boys spoke up he continued with, "For now Midoriya, you're with Sensei Hitomu. Bakugo, you're with Sensei Hikaku." The two boys looked over their new mentors and then bowed, yelling, "Thank you for teaching us." "Dismissed, your new uniforms are in the changing rooms," Mario said, waving the boys off to get changed, while the boys disappeared to change. Sensei Hikaku leaned over to Sensei Hitomu and whispered. Mario undersold how eager they would be towards being trained. I could feel my frozen heart being thawed from their smiles. Sensei Hikaku. Well, don't get your hopes up, not even Endeavor can do that. Everyone's eager in the beginning. They all eventually break and then the real training begins. Sensei Hitomu said in a downtrodden voice as she shook her head. The boys returned shortly after, wearing martial arts attire that Mirio had set aside for them. Sensei Hitomu looked at Izuku and said, "Alright Daijob, looks like you're with me for the next 2 weeks. Come with me." Izuku bowed, then followed Sensei Hitomu to a different area of the floor where some padded floor mats were waiting for them. Izuku looked them over, then turned to Sensei Kuma to ask a question. "How are we going to begin?" He was interrupted as he saw a fist getting close to his face. Yet before the attack could connect, he jumped back and landed on his hands as if to springboard himself further away from Sensei Hitomu. However, he didn't, he just put his feet back on the ground and began to stand. Yet those few seconds, Sensei Hitomu used her speed to get in close. Just as Izuku was straightening her back, Sensei Hitomu dropped down and swept Izuku's feet out from under him. It took Izuku and gravity to realize his feet were no longer under him. Just as Izuku realized he was no longer standing, his head hit the pads. If it wasn't for the pads, he would have likely been knocked unconscious. Sloppy and lazy. Mirio told us you have some close quarters training, but obviously you are still a novice. You need to train those skills until they become second nature. Until you can act as such without having to think about it, or you would have reacted towards my follow-up attack and not currently be on the floor. Your reflexes are good, a positive side effect, no doubt from your enchanted eyesight. Sensei Hikaku and I's purpose here is not just to teach you the art of karate and judo, but to expand your mind in the art of martial arts. To teach you the skills to win against any opponent, and part of that is reading your opponent's movements and reacting accordingly. Sensei Hitomu said as she held out a hand to help Izuku to his feet. Izuku took his hand and was hauled to his feet. Once had his glance, he readjusted the shoulder of his GI as it had begun to become loose. As he did, in his peripheral vision he saw Sensei Hitomu attacking. With her advice still in his ear, instead of jumping back, Izuku dove to the side and quickly rolled out of the way. However, as he sprung back up to his knees, Sensei Hitomu was waiting for him and put Izuku in a headlock. "You were quicker and more effective this time, but a well-trained opponent knows the same move won't work twice. After every fight anyone could improve and become better, but those who can improve themselves during a fight are those who always find victory," Sensei Hitomu said as she increased the pressure on Izuku's neck. The edge of his vision was starting to go black and his eyes were bulging, but he would still breathe for the most part. "But this isn't like those video games you kids play. You're not the only one that leveled up. While you learn about your opponent's moves, your opponents will be studying yours. There are steps to mastering a skill. First there are the basics, improve upon those to have a solid foundation. Then comes advancing your skills, learning attacks that have more risk, but more rewards. But always be cautious, as there is always room for failure. Then comes mastery, your movements and skills are now second nature. You are able to react and fight through years of practice and training, your body and mind become one." Sensei Hitomu released Izuku. Izuku leaned forward and worked to catch his breath. He took slow breaths until his vision turned to normal. Izuku then stood up and faced his sensei. "Now tell me what comes after mastery of skill." Izuku paused as he couldn't guess. Mastery of anything was supposed to be the highest level a person could achieve. "I do not know, Sensei." Sensei Hitomu wasn't expecting Izuku to know. He was only 6 years old, and it wasn't something many learned of. Few learn what the final step is, and fewer learn how to achieve it. So when you learn what the final step is, that's when you become unbeatable. "I understand, Sensei," Izuku said, with a bow. Sensei Hitomu gave a small smile. Before she retired from being a judo instructor and became a worker for the Hero Public Safety Commission, she had seen many people come into her dojo, all eager to learn how to fight, yet the longest she had seen someone stay as eager as they were when they first walked in was 1 week. Past that, many dropped out, and those who stayed lost their spark to learn more. She was hoping Izuku wasn't like that. "Tell me, kid, what's your purpose here?" Izuku was confused and showed it on his face. He thought it was obvious, aren't I here to train in judo and karate? He didn't know that this morning, but that was what he was doing here. Sensei Hitomu laughed and said, you really are an innocent kid, Dai Job. Why are you here? What force drove you to get out of bed and made you come here to suffer through training that would make most grown adults cry? Izuku thought about it for a second, still confused, and then he understood what his new sensei was asking. I want to be a hero. To be able to rescue others with a smile on my face, as All Might does every day. Sensei Hitomu looked Izuku in the eyes. Izuku believed in the purpose he had just stated, but under the stare he was getting he began to wonder if that was the wrong answer. No, it was the right answer. It was if he understood what it meant. Everyone said they wanted to be liked by All Might. He became the most popular hero. But what did it mean to be All Might? What skills would Izuku have to learn? What kind of training would be needed? And what practice would he have to learn to fight while always having a smile on his face? Fanboy, aren't you? So is the rest of the world, kid. You say those words, but you are here to prove them. So let's start with the basics. Sensei Hitomu said, holding out her hand in a handshake gesture. Izuku reached forwards to shake Sensei Hitomu's hand. However, Sensei Hitomu grabbed Izuku's wrist. Before Izuku knew what was happening, he was lifted above her shoulder and slammed him into the ground. Izuku tried to take a breath, but Sensei Hitomu was quick to wrap Izuku's arm with her legs and then cut off Izuku's airway with her ankles. And step 1 to learning is learning how it feels to be put into lock. You want to do it properly, you need to know how it feels to be on the receiving end. Feel how your body becomes locked and is now no longer able to move on its own. The force of your opponents becoming an immovable wall, that you have little chance of pushing back. To learn this, for the next 2 weeks, you'll be like this. You with your back on the floor, looking up at the ceiling. Once you have that, then I'll teach you how to free yourself. I understand, Sensei, Izuku said in a breathless voice. Sensei Hitomu looked over Izuku and she believed there was some truth to Izuku's statement. Within only a few minutes, Izuku had gained a better understanding of what it meant to be a pro hero, and what it meant to train within martial arts. And that was more than most people she met. The rest of the day, Izuku was put into different judo locks of bent arm, leg arm, cross arm, straight arm and knee arm. Sensei Kuma forced Izuku to hold each lock for 10 minutes while instructing him to feel how the different locks moved his muscles, forcing his tendons to an extreme range of motion. How that prevented him from moving whatever was being locked and how it immobilized the other parts of his body. Bakugo wasn't much better. He spent just as much time on the mat as Izuku did. He had spent the whole day learning how to block an attack. That or learning how to take a punch or a kick. When the two of them got home, they were never more grateful to be about to take a warm shower than to go to bed. While both options, judo and karate, were open to Izuku and Bakugo, they still had their preferences. Bakugo excelled at karate, getting the basic stance and form down quickly, while Izuku had taken to judo like a prodigy. Every time Sensei Hitomu showed him a new move, Izuku internalized everything. How his body felt, how it was unable to respond, and most importantly how Sensei Hitomu taught him to break free. Over the next 6 months, Izuku and Bakugo's skills improved greatly as their sensei held nothing back. By the time winter hit, the boys had a good enough baseline that Mirio saw fit to let them use their quirks during martial training. That was where they would learn how to use their new skills and quirk in tandem. So in terms of karate, Bakugo practiced adding force to his attacks with his explosions. With a palm thrust, unleashing an explosion as his fist hit to increase the force directly into his opponent's chest. While within judo, Izuku worked on the timing of transforming his arm to suddenly increase the range of his attack and push his opponents away from it. On the side, Izuku learned how to create better leverage with his elongated arm to either break out of a hold or to better immobilize his opponents without having to use much strength. While they practiced these skills with Sensei Hikaku and Sensei Hitomu, the boys found it better to practice with each other. So every first Saturday of each month was set aside for the boys to spar against each other and train with someone of their own skill level. Mirio noticed along with the sensei that as soon as the spar, the boys' already accelerated growth was becoming more so, and Murio remembered how well Kana and Inko had progressed when they fought each other. Every day Murio marked their boys' progress, and every day he was satisfied with how well everything was coming together. Project Velocity had just started out a program to feel a problem no thought the world had. He was lucky that the old HPSC president saw the same program. He was lucky to find Kana and Inko. He was lucky that when it came down to it was decided he was too invaluable to the program to taste to the side. He was lucky to be able to find Takami, and now he was lucky that he was training Izuku and Bakugo. Murio turned off his computer after finishing the day's assessment. As he stood up, he couldn't help but wonder when his luck was going to run out. If he was lucky, never, but like all other recourse, eventually it would be run dry. And training has begun, and it seems that Izuku and Bakugo are absorbing anything and everything they can. As posting the next few chapters, I hadn't really done a training arc, so I skipped time a bit to their first major evaluation. It will be to show how the two of them have grown and what progress they wish to make in the future. Next time. Evaluation Part 1 review, and tell me what you think. Evaluation Part 1. Alright, it's time to post the first chapter of the pre-UA training arc. So 4th of July was a very slow day for me. I was supposed to be driving in my city's parade, however a mistake of the cars occurred. So I got up at 6 o'clock for nothing. I learned of the change around 7 o'clock, and the official parade didn't start until 10 o'clock. At least the part. So I wrote. I didn't have my laptop, but I had my phone, and I worked on this story for over 5 hours. So I should be consistently posting the next few weeks. And since I had an opportunity to write for so long, I have a lot more to this arc than I originally planned, so. As always, I do not own My Hero Academia or any of their characters. With that, let's start with a bang. As it was standard for Project Velocity to give time to lay a foundation for new trainees, Izuku and Bakugo's first major evaluation wasn't until they were 8. And knowing that headline ahead of time, Murio used every second to get the boys ready. He had faith they would pass, but he was a more cautious man in his old age. And he was sure Madam President would try to make it so the evaluation held a ridiculous standard. She would try to make it seem the boys were unfit to become pro-heroes. As if they weren't up to the Hero Public Safety Commission's standard, to her standards. So this time Murio wasn't taking any kind of chances. The evaluation was set for July 24th, and Murio had the date set and marked on his calendar with a big red circle. And as the fateful day got closer and closer, he tried not to stress about it too much. Yet he found himself reaching into his inner pocket looking for his cigarette more and more often. He was sure he was handling it well enough. As no one asked him or mentioned that he looked stressed, except for his wife. Then again, she knew everything about him, so there was no fooling her. On the day of the evaluation, Izuku woke up to his alarm, the All Might theme song, at 7 o'clock in the morning. With a small yawn, Izuku reached over and held the off button, and the silence filled his room. He sat up in bed and shook his head to make the fog of sleep disappear from his mind. Let out another small yawn, Izuku got out of bed and walked over to his window. He mindlessly opened the blind to let in the sunlight, as he was the kind of person who couldn't fall asleep if there was any kind of light in his room. As soon as the sunlight hit Ayuku's eyes directly, he felt himself wake up more. This allowed him to focus outside the window, and as the day, it looked like it was going to be warm and sunny, perfect for summer to go to the beach and swim. Unfortunately, he was going to be spending most of it indoors. Stepping away from the window, Izuku brushed his ever-growing hair out from in front of him. The motion of brushing his hair out of his face reminded him why he needed to wake up so early. Izuku walked across his room and lazily headed out into the hallway. Once he reached the bathroom, he headed inside. Once inside, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror and saw how long his hair had gotten. Even with his hair cut only 3 weeks ago, it is already starting to reach past his neck. Izuku sighed as if that was going to be a battle. Keeping his hair at a normal length, he was going to fight his entire life. Pulling himself away from his reflection, Izuku walked over to the shower and drew back the curtains and turned the knob to hot. As Izuku waited for his shower to warm up, he shuffled back over to the sink and grabbed his toothbrush and toothpaste. After wetting the bristle and putting on some toothpaste, Izuku set about brushing his teeth. While Izuku often came home from training tired or exhausted, Inko never let him skip his hygiene. By the time he was done brushing his teeth, the shower had warmed up to a comfortable temperature. Izuku stripped off his pajamas and hopped into the shower. What little sleep was left in Izuku's body quickly disappeared as the warm water ran over Izuku's body. Rolling his neck and shoulder, Izuku was about to relax a bit. But then it was time to start his morning shower routine, which began by applying a ridiculous amount of shampoo to his hair. As it was arguably one of the most important parts of his quirk, Mirio and Inko made sure his hair was always clean and healthy. In the beginning, Izuku didn't listen to them and just used normal amounts of shampoo. However, after he noticed how it affected his bullet, Izuku quickly switched to the recommended amount. Once Izuku's hair was covered in shampoo, he let it sit. As he allowed the shampoo to soak into his hair and scalp, Izuku sat about washing the rest of his body, staring at the top and working his way down. Once that task was done, Izuku leaned forward and put his hair under the stream of water. He coaxed the massive amount of shampoo out of his hair by running his fingers through it. With the amount he had used, it took merely 2 minutes for all of the shampoo to be rinsed out. Yet that didn't mean he was finished. He grabbed a silicone hairbrush and covered it with shampoo. He then used the brush to directly attack his scalp. After 5 minutes, Izuku rinsed the shampoo out of his hair and then finally turned the water off. Returning the brush to its alcove, Izuku shook the shampoo bottle and saw he still had a quarter bottle left, which was just perfect as he had opened the bottle last week. Izuku used his finger to brush his hair back, then he threw open the curtains and stepped out onto a bath rug. He grabbed a towel and set about drying off his body, then wrapping it around his waist. The last step of his bathroom routine was to walk over to the sink and use his hairdryer to blow dry his hair, as it was found out early now that using a towel to dry his hair resulted in his hair becoming weaved together and making bad bullets. Izuku took his time drying his hair, as this is why he had to get up early, as it took the most time. Finally, once his hair was dry, Izuku turned off the hairdryer and sent it on the counter. Normally he would be fine with letting his hair fall into its natural position, but with how long his hair was getting and the evaluation happening, he knew he needed to make it look presentable, so he grabbed a comb and began to style it. Once Izuku found a look he liked, he grabbed a can of hairspray from under the sink. Once his hair was sure to stay in play, Izuku returned the hairspray and then walked out of the bathroom. He hurried down the hallway and walked back into his room. After hanging his towel on a hanger on the back of his door, Izuku dressed himself in a pair of blue jeans with a belt, and an All Might t-shirt, as it didn't matter where he went, he was going to wear something All Might. Once he was clothed, Izuku grabbed a pair of socks and headed downstairs. He headed for the kitchen and found that Inko was already making breakfast. He began to make his way to the table but stopped when a knock came from the front door. "That must be Katsuki. Can you get the Zuzu?" Inko said as she worked on finishing breakfast. Izuku nodded, spun around on the wood floor and headed to the front door. Already knowing who it was, Izuku opened the door and met Bakugo. He was dressed in jeans similar to Izuku but was wearing a burnt orange shirt that had a black X going down the back. He had a glint in his eyes as he flashed a grin. "Hey Kachan," Izuku said, moving to the side to allow Bakugo to walk in. "Yeah, die job," Bakugo said, trying to make a nickname stick, as Izuku had dough with Kachan. Yet no matter how hard he tried, no nicknames stuck, something Bakugo found infuriating. "Sorry, but that's reserved for Sensei Hitomo, try again," Izuku said, a big smile appearing on his face as he knew what his best friend was trying to do. "Boys, breakfast is ready," Inko called from the kitchen. The two of them quickly walked to the dining room where Inko had prepared them rice bowls with fish and egg. They all sat down and gave thanks, then began to eat. While they ate, Bakugo turned to Izuku and with a mouth full of fish asked, "So are you ready to blow whatever test Mirio has ready for us today out of the water?" Izuku made sure to swallow the rice in his mouth before speaking. "Yeah, I'm sure we'll be able to pass the tests. I'm just nervous about Prime Minister Renzo and the head of the Hero Public Safety Commission being there." Izuku then took a small drink of milk to wash down a bit of rice and fish. Izuku's comment caught Bakugo by surprise. He didn't know the Prime Minister of Japan and the President of the HPSC were going to be there. This made Bakugo start to choke on his fish and he had to quickly drink water to get it down. He then had to take a few deep breaths before he could speak. Once he was able to speak, he asked, "The Prime Minister of Japan is going to be there?" "Yeah," Izuku said in an unaffected tone as if he hadn't just dropped a figurative bomb in Bakugo's lap. Inko froze as she was able to take a bite of fish. She knew the Prime Minister was going to be there today, as Mirio had called her last night. Inko gave a small side-eye to Izuku. How had he found out about that? Inko made sure her door was closed and that Izuku was in bed. "How did you hear about that, Zuzu?" Inko asked, then put the fish in her mouth. She likes to think she had a good enough relationship with her son that he would be honest about something like that. Izuku turned to his mother and gave a, pleased with himself, kind of grin. "I heard Mirio talking to Henkido last week. They were discussing his travel arrangement to make sure he got in safely. It was pretty cool to hear about that," Izuku said as he finished his breakfast and walked to the kitchen to put his dish in the sink. "Oi, nerd, you didn't think that it would be nice to inform me of that too?" Bakugo said, shooting an explosive glare at his best friend. Bakugo was smart and confident in his ability, but for something big like that, he would need time to process everything. Izuku skipped through the dining room and headed upstairs to brush his teeth. Before he disappeared from sight he called out, "What? I just did. A few seconds ago, you're welcome." "That's not allowed, you can't do that." Bakugo huffed, "You could have at least told me yesterday, then I would have time to mentally prepare myself." "Well, you have 10 minutes to prepare yourself, then we need to head out," Inko said as she finished her food and washed it down with the rest of her glass of water. She quickly put her plate and utensils in the sink, then grabbed her keys and purse from the counter. Bakugo quickly finished the rest of his breakfast and put his dishes in the sink. He then walked over to the front door to wait, as Izuku finished brushing his teeth. After making sure everything was ready, Inko led the two boys out to the car. Once they were in the car, Inko turned the car on and headed out of the neighborhood. As they drove through town, Izuku and Bakugo talked about what tests they thought Mirio would have planned for them, all the while Bakugo kept on harassing Izuku for not telling him about the Prime Minister. Once they arrived, Inko pulled up to the gate and scanned her parking pass. As the gate opened, Inko pulled in and headed to the parking lot that was on the side of the building. After parking and the car was turned off, the trio got out of the car and walked around to the front. Izuku held the door open for the group and once inside they walked over to the elevator Inko called the elevator, and once it arrived, they stepped inside, and Izuku hit the button for the 5th floor. They quietly rode the elevator to the 5th floor. Arriving on the 5th floor, they found Mirio and his team, along with Madam President of the HPSC and Prime Minister Renzo, waiting for them. Mirio looked over from his superiors and flashed a smile at the two boys. No need for them to see how nervous he was about the upcoming tests. "Good morning, you two. Today is your first examination to see how your skills and quirks have grown through your training while a part of Project Velocity. Are you ready?" Izuku and Bakugo walked out of the elevator, then bowed and said, "Yes, sir. For the first stage you will be showing the limits of your quirks and your control over them. Second stage will be to test your more physical skills, the standard fitness done in middle school, then you will spar against each to show your skill in judo and karate. Stage 3 will test your mental skills, deductive reasoning, spatial awareness and overall level of intelligence. Understood?" Mirio said. "Yes, sir." Izuku and Bakugo then turned to Prime Minister Renzo and Madam President and bowed, showing their respect to their superiors. Which just pissed Madam President off. She had come to find flaws in Mirio's program, and she could tell the two boys were going to make that hard. Despite being 8 years old, they were acting like well-mannered young men. "Katsuki Bakugo, let's begin with you," Mirio said as he gestured for Bakugo to step forward. Bakugo walked up to Henkido, who pulled out and then placed a black armband on each of Bakugo's wrists. She pressed the buttons on the back and waited until the buttons turned orange. Satisfied with that, Henkido pulled out 2 small silver discs and strapped them around Bakugo's shoulder so the sensors rested on his scapules. The screen behind Mario connects to Bakugo's armbands and shows a flat line on the bottom of a graph. Izuku looked at the graph and saw it was displaying a kilogram per square meter. Bakugo always looked at the screen and realized what it was for, finally figured out a way for me to test how strong my quirk really is. Yes, Mario said, then turned to Prime Minister Renzo and explained, with young Bakugo's quirk it was quite the challenge, as we couldn't simply have him hit a punching machine and any sensor we set up, his quirk would destroy. So we went a different direction. The devices in the armbands are similar to electric massage pads. However, instead of sending electrical pulses, it measures them as Bakugo's mind sends them to his hands to activate his quirks, like flexing muscles. This coupled with the sensors on his shoulders. We'll get a reading of how much kinetic energy his quirk generates. To make sure the equipment works, Bakugo lit off some small explosions in his hand. The graph on the sensor jumped a bit each time he lit one off. Mario, sir, the sensors appear to be working and are picking up Bakugo's quirk. One of the workers of Project Velocity said. Good. Young Bakugo, let's start with the demonstration. 80% should be fine for now, want to save a bit for later. Mario said as he folded his arms and waited for Madam President and Prime Minister Renzo to be blown away. Bakugo nodded, signaling Henkido to step back, cracked his knuckles and held his hands out in front of him, his palms wide open. He gained a massive grin and yelled, "Go to hell." He flexed both of his arms and ignited most of his sweat. As Bakugo worked to hold his ground, most of the others had to do the same. Izuku simply stood simple, and Inko had to use her quirk a bit to anchor her feet to the ground. As soon as the initial explosion was over and as Bakugo waved the smoke from out in front of his face, Mario looked over at the screen and looked over the graph. The entire explosion only lasted for 2 seconds, but the graph began to fall back down to 0. Dismissing this, Mario moved the sensor around until he found the highest point of the graph. He smiled when he found the number and did some quick calculations. Congratulations, young Bakugo, you generated 50,000 kilograms per square meter. That is a little under half the force the average car generates in a crash while going 95 kilometers per hour. Well done. Impressive display of power. Prime Minister Renzo said as he patted some smoke out of his fur. Though power is nothing without control, what do you have ready to show his level of control? A skill young Bakugo has worked on for some time, Mario said as he reset the graph and pushed a button on the keyboard. Panels in the floor and ceiling opened up, and a red target moved into the room. There were a total of 50 targets, and none were near each other, an exercise young Bakugo helped design. The purpose of this exercise is for him to destroy each target without letting his feet touch the ground. Madam President scoffed and said, "You expect him to fly, yet his quirk shows no means of achieving such a thing." It was such a luscious idea as every quirk had a set skill set, and heroes were idiots for trying something that their quirk obviously couldn't do. Mario frowned a bit but quickly went back to a neutral expression. He was more than happy to prove Madam President wrong, and since her initial thought over Mario's belief of Bakugo's aerial advantage, he had been waiting to do so. Not without some control. Young Bakugo, you may start when you're ready to. Bakugo nodded, then dropped to the floor to do a few quick push-ups, then got back on his feet. He then took a few running steps, then as he was about to cross an invisible line he placed his hands behind him and lit off an explosion. There was enough force behind it to send him rocketing towards the first target. As Bakugo neared the first target he reached forwards with his right hand and blasted it apart. With the explosion killing a bit of his momentum, Bakugo began to fall, but before he could hit the ground, he angled an explosion to throw him up and towards the next target. This time as he reached that target, he kicked it with his foot as he turned around to immediately shoot towards the third target. Madam President did not seem too pleased by this and folded her arm and looked at the ground. However, Prime Minister Renzo was looking over at the graph, which was jumping up every time Bakugo lit off an explosion. This time the sensors were only reading 2,000 kilograms per square meter, more than enough to send Bakugo rocketing around the room. Part of the exercise is not allowing the boy to touch the ground, yet he is moving so quickly that it would be hard to tell if he did so. Prime Minister Renzo said as he tried to follow the blur that Bakugo had become. It was clear Bakugo had done this exercise or something similar to it many times. That part is more based on the honor system, but young Bakugo is a stubborn pride boy and will do his best to meet all aspects of any training exercise. Mario explained as a series of explosions went off, and the graph jumped up each time. A few seconds later, Bakugo hit the floor away from the group and rolled to get back up. You complete that in 3 minutes and 32 seconds, you beat your record by 5 seconds. Henkido said as she clicked a stopwatch. Bakugo smirked as he wiped his hands on his legs and walked over to Izuku, who gave his best friend a small slow clap. Wow! Izuku said in a sarcastic tone, but still impressed. He knew how much Bakugo valued his quirks and the power of it. So when someone sounded unimpressed by it, Bakugo took it on a personal level. In this chapter we get to see Izuku's morning routine and how Bakugo handles himself of Project Velocity's evaluation. Next week we get to see how well Izuku does in his section of the evaluation. Next time. Evaluation Part 2 review and tell me what you think. Evaluation Part 2. It's time to see Izuku's portion of Phase 1 and how they handle Phase 2. Phase 2 is a bit short as the tests are used again later in the story, and this time is more to give a baseline to show how they have grow when they do the test again. As always, I do not own My Hero Academia or any of their characters. With that, let's start off with a bang at Izuku's comment. Bakugo began to growl, but since he knew it was all in good fun he didn't do much. Mario looked over the graph that recorded Bakugo's quirk for a few seconds, then he closed it. He then turned to Izuku and said, "Young Midoriya, now for your turn." Izuku turned and nodded to Mario, who grabbed a black briefcase from the desk and handed it over to Henkido. Henkido took the briefcase from her boss with a nod and then headed over to a spot clear from the group. Izuku followed behind her, already knowing what was in the briefcase. Once they reached the spot, Henkido set the briefcase down on the ground while Izuku knelt with his right leg down and his left leg up. As Henkido opened the briefcase and began to pull out a device, Izuku rested his left hand on his left knee as he brought his right arm forward and rested into his left hand. Izuku then flexed his right forearm, and his fingers lengthened and then curled and narrowed as they morphed together, taking the shape of a hollow cylinder. His wrist inflated a bit, then narrowed on the forestock of Izuku's weapon. Finally, his forearm expanded out into the shape of the grip and stock of a sniper rifle. Izuku's entire forearm and hand pulsed as it told on a metallic texture and began purple, while at the elbow, the purple color outlined Izuku's veins before disappearing into his bicep. At the sight of Izuku's arm, Madam President looked up and a smirk appeared on her face. It was different from Lady Nagin, but the same nonetheless. Anyone who saw would only be able to see Lady Nagant and they would call Izuku a villain. And to the malleable mind of an 8-year-old, no matter how much Izuku was told by Inko and Mario, he would eventually begin to believe that voice that was louder. Madam President won't have to do anything, she simply needs to abide by her time and wait. Even if Izuku survived to high school, his skills, his name, and his quirk would force him into the spotlight. Then the world nation, not the whole world, would see him and see him for who he was. And when the people called for Izuku to be arrested, Madam President would have the perfect hero to take him down. Then Madam President would be able to show the world how evil Izuku was, now corrupt Project Velocity was. Then she would be able to form her hero training program. But for now, she will be patient, and she was nothing if not a patient person. Once Izuku's arm was done transforming, Henkido had finished setting up the device that turned out to be a chronograph. She extended the bottom legs until the dive was level with Izuku's arms. Henkido locked the two metal antennas into place and then turned the device on. Once the green light of the screen turned on and the reading appeared, Henkido turned back to Mario. Mario looked down at his laptop and then flashed a thumbs up to show he was receiving all the data. With everything set, Henkido turned to Izuku and nodded, who nodded back. As Henkito returned to the group, Izuku took a few deep breaths and began to build up the pressure within his forearm. As he continued to slow his breath, Izuku brought his head down to look down at the sight of his rifle. As the range came into view, Izuku smirked as he saw a target downrange, hovering in midair. Mirio was already testing Izuku. "On your time," Mirio said, not noticing that Izuku was already beginning to align his shots. Izuku took a few seconds to align his shot with the target, and then with an exhale, he flexed his entire right arm. Immediately, everyone covered their ears from the bullet breaking the sound barrier. He had learned that while the motion of flexing his right arm was not needed to fire a bullet, Izuku had found when he focused on his right arm, he could fire a bullet at a higher speed. Izuku's arm was kicked back a bit as the bullet went rocketing out of his arm and through the chronograph. Izuku didn't move to see the score as he watched his bullet hit a target Mirio had secretly put up on the other side of the building. Once the bullet hit the target, Izuku exhaled as he sat up and began rubbing his right shoulder a bit. While training, his right shoulder had got used to the kickback, but the higher pressurized shots still left his shoulder feeling a bit sore. Izuku continued to rub his shoulder as he stood up and looked over at Mirio, who winked and then looked at his monitor. "You clocked in at 6,000 feet per second, that's around Mach 5. Well done, young Midoriya," Mirio said, then pressed some keys on his keyboards, resulting in more targets appearing from the ceiling and floors. "You have 50 targets to hit. The moment you get down to 15, they'll begin to move, on your time." Izuku nodded and turned back to all the targets. They were all varying distances from Izuku. It was similar to how Mirio had first tested his quirk, but this time it actually meant something. Izuku had 3 years of training now, and it was expected he would do well on the test. As Izuku looked over the target, he thought about all the training he had had and what made this training exercise harder. It was obvious that a normal person would go for the closer targets first, then work their way up to the harder targets that were further away. Normally that would be fine, as Izuku had made that mistake the first time only to learn the last 15 targets would move. After learning that, Izuku trained to be fine hitting the furthest targets first, as there wasn't a need to make it more difficult for him than it needed to be. As Izuku looked over the target, his mind mapped out a pattern for him to follow. A pattern that allowed him to move quickly from target to target while leaving the 15 closest ones untouched. As his eyes landed on the last target, he stepped forward and raised his right arm out in front of him. Then as it transformed, a bullet was shot out, catching everyone off guard. The bullet flew through the air and hit the first target in the middle of the bullseye. Izuku didn't waste time and moved down and to the right and hit his second target. Another hit. With this monument, Izuku quickly picked off each target, moving a seemingly random pattern, and when he passed a target and didn't hit it, Madam President smirked. To her, it seems Izuku was randomly picking off targets and had missed one as he was moving too quickly and seemed to be more worried about having a good time. She was not the only one to notice this. Prime Minister Renzo had kept a close eye on Izuku's as he moved from target to target, and his seemingly random pathing got a lot of acknowledgement. His past in Japan's military had given him the skills to recognize Izuku's pathing. Izuku could have gone for the closest target first and worked his way back, was it not for the last part of the last 15 moving. While it was still unclear what kind of man Izuku would grow up to be, at this moment, Prime Minister Renzo could appreciate the amount of skill Izuku had at such a young age. As Izuku hit the 34th target, he took a small pause in his firing and looked over the last 15 targets. The last 15 targets shook and then began to move around the room, their patterns seeming to be random. Izuku waited for a few seconds, watching the target's seemingly random movements. Yet Izuku began to see their pattern and smirked as he suddenly fired at one of the moving targets. His shot appeared to go low and to the left, but suddenly the target moved down and to the left, allowing Izuku's shot to hit. Izuku then moved his arm around and then fired 3 bullets, and hit 3 more targets. Izuku then paused for 5 seconds, then, without moving his arm, fired 2 bullets. The 2 bullets moved in line with each other, but then the first bullet hit a target. It created a hole that the second bullet used to fly through the target and hit a different target that moved behind the first target. Izuku grinned at his shot but then noticed the last 8 targets had begun to move more quickly, and their pattern had changed. Izuku looked over at Mirio, who kept a straight face. Izuku shook his head. Mirio was always looking for new exercises for them to do or making their exercises harder. Izuku moved back to aiming, but this time it took nearly a minute before he took another shot. Then as Izuku tracked the last 7 remaining targets, his vision began to go blurry. Izuku wanted to blink, but then his vision went clear, and his field of vision expanded. He did not have to move from target to keep track of them. His eyes were able to keep track of them all at the same time. Izuku's eyebrow lifted at this sudden vision. He knew he had enhanced vision which allowed him to see further distances but make all this information at once. It was new to him, yet Izuku's arm was slowly moving into position. Once his arm stopped moving, Izuku didn't hesitate to take a shot knowing it was going to go right where it needed to. Yet Izuku was still a little surprised when the bullet hit, but then his arm began moving again. In each position, he fired a shot and then quickly moved to the next one. As he fired the last bullet, Izuku blinked, and the last few seconds became a bit of a blur. Well done, young Midoriya. You complete the course in 3 minutes and 31 seconds, a new record. Mirio said, then looked over at Prime Minister Renzo. I find myself feeling the need to point out that young Midoriya here was able to hit bullseyes on everything. A point that did not need to be made and does not affect my decisions, but one that is greatly appreciated. Prime Minister Renzo said, now I believe you stated the second phase would be showing their physical strength. Yes. As it is standard in Japan, beginning in middle school, yearly every student is required to complete 8 tests without their quirks. These tests are used to mark and track their growth through middle and high school, and to test different strength attributes, strength, speed, flexibility, though for the sake of time we'll be removing the endurance test. We'll begin with the 50-meter dash. Mirio explained and then turned to his employees and nodded. They all quickly began setting up the needed equipment for the different testing. For the 50 meters, they placed 2 laser sensors 50 meters apart that would begin a timer when someone broke the first laser and stop the timer when they broke the second one. Once this and more were set up, Mirio called the 2 boys up and had them line up at the first laser. Bakugo was first, and when the starting gun went off, he took off down towards the second sensor. He flew down the track and managed to earn himself a 45.4 called out by the machine at the end of the 50 meters. Bakugo cheered a bit as he flashed a grin at his best friend. After Henkito reset the timer, it was Izuku's turn. He walked up to the first laser and looked down the 50 meters to the second laser. He took a deep breath, and when the starting gun went off, Izuku exhaled and pushed off the ground as hard as he could. He shot forwards and quickly got his left foot out and front and, when he landed on it, shifted his weight forwards. This allowed him to keep his speed near his highest, earning him a 44.5. Ha, Kachan, looks like I won that time. Izuku said as he slowed, then turned and walked back to the group. Bakugo had his arms crossed and didn't look too pleased. He wanted to be the best, be number 1. To him that meant being the fastest, the strongest, the best at everything. Don't get cocky, that's only 1 out of 6. Bakugo pointed out, he would make sure to get back and win the next test. Yes, young Bakugo, now it is time for the grip strength, Mirio said, walking up to the boy. Holding out 2 grip strength testers, you will each grip this device with your right hand, holding it for 3 seconds. You repeated this 3 times then switched your left hand. Bakugo and Izuku nodded, taking the devices. They held them in their right hand and Mirio said, begin. Bakugo and Izuku pulled down on the handles as hard as they could. After 3 seconds, Mirio said, release. Bakugo and Izuku released their devices, and Mirio read their number. Bikugo, you got 50 kilograms, Midoriya 75 kilograms, and again. Izuku exhaled and closed his right hand as hard as he took. His knuckles immediately turned white from how hard he was pulling. During the next 3 seconds, Izuku could feel how tight the muscles within his fingers were coiled to push all the power they could. After 3 seconds, Mirio said, release. This time Bakugo got 58. and Izuku got 78, again. Izuku closed his right fist for a third time, and his entire hand turned white as he pulled down the handle. Izuku could feel his hand shake a bit, but he refused to release his finger until time was called. It felt like a whole minute before Mirio took them to release. Izuku looked down at the device in their hands and saw he had gotten an 80 while Bakugo had gotten another 58. Young Bakugo, you averaged 55 and young Midoriya, you averaged 77. Now for your left hand, Mirio said as Bakugo and Izuku shook their right hands to see the blood flowing again while switching over to their left. After repeating the exercise, Bakugo averaged 51, while Izuku's score did drop to 45. This drop in score earned Izuku a smug smirk from Bakugo. Next was the standing long jump. This time, Izuku went first. He stood at the edge of a sandpit. On your time, Mirio said. Izuku did a few short jumps and kicked his legs up to warm them up a bit, then began to swing his arms back and forwards. Then as Izuku swung his arms back, he squatted down, and when he brought his arms back up, he jumped forward as far as he could. In midair, Izuku took the pose of an Olympic long jumper, and once he landed in the sandpit, he rolled to keep himself from twisting an ankle. Izuku quickly hopped up on his feet and saw he had jumped a little under 3 meters, well above the average of someone his age and height. However, when Bakugo stepped up and launched himself into the sandpit, he beat Izuku with a 3.4-meter jump. Izuku smiled and dropped a bit as Bakugo stood up and brushed himself off. Bakugo gave his best friend a massive grin while Izuku reciprocated by sticking his tongue. Their rivalry was stopped as Henkito walked up and handed them 2 gray balls. All right, for this test you are to throw the balls as far as you can, Mirio said, earning him a confused look from Izuku and Bikaug. Neither of them could really believe this was an actual test, it was so simple. And as with everything, Bakugo had to turn it into a competition. Bakugo twirled his ball in his hand as he looked at Izuku and said, "The one that throws it further gets lunch free from the other." "Looks like Aunt Mitsuki is buying me lunch," Izuku said as he lightly tossed the ball up into the air before catching it. He let the ball roll down his arm before popping it back into the air and catching it again. Izuku then stepped forward to a line Henkito had placed on the ground. Izuku stood at the line and then drew his right foot and arm back while bracing his left foot against the ground. With an exhale, Izuku shifted his weight forward while throwing his right arm forward. At the last second, Izuku whipped his wrist forwards and threw the balls into the air. The ball went soaring through the air, spinning as it arced until it began to slow down and eventually gentling, falling back down to the ground. 18.3 meters. Henkito said, looking down at her tablet. Bakugo laughed as he stepped forward. In a similar fashion, Bakugo threw the ball into the air, where it had a longer hang time than Izuku's. This made it appear that it would go further, but it suddenly lost all momentum. This caused the ball to fall to the ground and bounced a bit. 17.9 meters. Henkito said as Bakugo's score appeared next to Izuku on her tablet. "Good job, you two. Next is sit-ups," Mirio said. Izuku and Bakugo immediately dropped to the floor and got ready. Mirio started the timer, and Izuku and Bakugo began to sit down. Bakugo was going faster in the beginning, easily getting in more reps faster than Izuku was. But by the 2.5-minute mark, Bakugo was beginning to slow down, while Izuku kept his steady pace and became too slow to catch Bakugo's count. The moment Mirio called 5 minutes, Izuku and Bakugo fell to the ground, gasping for air. Mirio gave them a few seconds to catch their breath before asking, "What's your count?" 102. Izuku and Bakugo said at the same time. Mirio didn't question it as he had also been counting and was not all surprised that they had the same score as they trained together and had similar levels of strength. Next was the seated toe touch, and as Izuku was more specialized in judo, he was able to get 10 centimeters, while Bakugo got 6. Something Bakugo wasn't too pleased with as by his count he was losing overall. Then for the final test, there were repetitive side steps. Both of the boys were told to stand between a pair of cones that were 1.5 meters apart. As the sound of the starting gun, they began to